Thanks, Naomi, for the introduction. Hi, everyone. I'm excited to be here. I've actually never given a keynote, and especially like in front of this many people. But I hope that today I make the trip worth it and can deliver something to you that you can take home and you can learn from in the topic of ketogenic diets. So it's not very research heavy today. I don't like to talk too much nerd science in front of people that are, only 2 years younger than me. So the goal today is to just sort of expose you to some of the history of how we came about to discuss and study ketogenic diets, how to make it relevant, and how you can take ketogenic diets and probably implement it into the kitchen or tell your mom or your dad or your aunt that is trying to lose weight. And then the most sciencey part, if you want to call it that way, is in the middle, where the whole idea of the lab that I'm part of is to take basic benchtop science and make it into something translational. I don't care what it looks in a pipette, I don't care what it looks in an assay. I want to know what real life examples we can use ketogenic diets for. And lastly, I'm just going to end up with some future work, some study ideas for you if you're interested in this topic and you want to research it, and then finalize with take-home messages and a Q&A. So the first section, let's set the groundwork. If we go down to the human physiology, glycogen is a precious substrate, and usually it's pretty finite. It's solvated by water. We have about 400 to 500 grams of it if you're really training. But it's this very tiny metabolite relative to the fat or adipose tissue. Now, adipose tissue is kind of a double-edged sword, so it can provide all the hormones and the insulation and the energy substrate, but too much of it can be kind of cumbersome, especially if it's around the visceral adipose tissue, right? We don't want fat around the cardiac muscle, we don't want it in the liver, around the kidneys, especially around our organs, right? The reason that ketogenic diets are kind of interesting is that they act as a primer. So adipose relative to glycogen is about 50-to-1 ratio. And so if we can tap this with nutrition, we can actually use our endogenous body fat stores and dietary fat when we're in an environment of a decreased insulin and decreased liver glycogen to produce or release fatty acids in the blood. The liver is a very metabolically flexible organ, and usually in the condition of a carbohydrate restriction and fat intake increase, we start to produce these ketone bodies, namely beta-hydroxybutyrate. So you can track this in the blood, just like if anybody has a relative that's diabetic. Yeah, so a few of you are familiar with the daily finger stick and the checking of ketones. You want to be within a certain parameter. When you make about 75 to 100 grams a day, tissues such as the brain, the muscle, and the heart can take them up for energy. And in some situations, let's say Alzheimer's, the brain might actually prefer ketones over glucose because glucose transport is impaired. Sometimes in cardiac heart failure too. There might be many pleiotropic effects, is what we call them, when ketones are in circulation. And it's been around for about 150 years. So in the 1860s, this was used as a standard for diabetes treatment when medication failed to control circulating blood glucose. In the 20s, it was used as epilepsy treatment. So kids with intractable epilepsy, when epilepsy medication wasn't working, were placed on a ketogenic diet, and they had a remission in epileptic seizures. And then you might notice a pattern, like every 50 years something comes about. And if your intuition is right, we're in the 2020s of ketogenic research, and it's been evidenced even just looking at the search trends on the internet. So the ketogenic diet was the most searched diet on the internet in 2018. Now I joined the lab in 2017. I don't think there's a correlation. You can hold your applause till the end. But in 2019, right, like pre-pandemic, this was absolutely the highest interest that anybody has ever had in history on what a ketogenic diet is and how to implement it. And usually it starts simple. I know we're in a science department or environment, and we're peer review oriented. But sometimes something can start as simple as, taking a magazine or seeing a cover, checking out Walmart, or seeing something that's floating around on the internet, and putting it into layman's and making it impressive to anybody that's not necessarily in research has a meaningful impact into the general population. And so now in the section 2, I want to transition, and I'm going to show you sort of the secret Krabby Patty recipe that we use at the Ohio State on designing ketogenic diets. So remember what I said about every 50 years there's like something that's coming new and improves about research, especially in this area. When you read a paper, I want you to focus on how people present ketogenic diets, because the way we do it is in a well-formulated way. And it's pretty simple. So conditionally, you limit carbohydrates to somewhere around 20 to 50 grams a day. That's step 1. You move down, and then you set your protein intake. Usually, you can get away anywhere between 1.2 to 1.8 grams per kilogram of body weight. 1.5 is a nice sweet spot, and we've seen that it improves nitrogen metabolism, or at least maintains it in the context of weight loss. And then fat, instead of saying eat as much fat as you can or you want, it is elegant to put it in a way where you're saying that you consume fat to reach satiety. You consume fat to reach a level of fullness and a level where the diet is palatable. And so this is an example from a weight loss study that we conducted, meals prepped by your very own, where we focus on color, fiber content. We do macronutrient and micronutrient analysis, and if we have any dietitians in the room, it's not a yellow and brown diet. It's supposed to be pretty colorful, and you can get pretty creative with it. And so the menu itself, when you're designing this kind of a diet, can contain an array of foods, and you want to hit these array of foods because you don't want to be deficient in any. And that was a pitfall of Atkins. So when Atkins had this diet in the 70s, major criticism was that it was deficient in a lot of the micronutrients. But how do we know that we're in ketosis, right? So like everybody's saying, oh, I've gone keto, oh, I've been eating low carb for years, and my ketones got to be so high. Well, a lot of people like to track it in urine. A lot of people like to track it in blood, and blood is a very reliable measure of ketosis. So much to the question I had about diabetes, when you read a methods section of a paper, you want to see if there's a capillary fingerstick monitoring of ketones. There's a zone, physiological zone, labeled in green, where most of us in the room are going to stay in this zone. If you're starting a ketogenic diet, you'll be somewhere around here. If you're coming after a run and you're in ketosis, you might be somewhere in the yellow. But you'll never get into ketoacidosis unless you have type 1 diabetes. And this is a very important point to make because it is physiologically sound that you're not going to get yourself into acidosis because ketones inhibit further fat loss. You will always stay within this tight green range as long as your pancreas is working well. And if you don't want to cook, or if you don't want to join a study, in recent years, there's been growing interest in companies sponsoring or providing meals to anybody that wishes to purchase them. So we've done, for example, a study where we tested for 5 days these sorts of ketogenic meals, and you can see how a plot would look like if you're tracking your ketones every day. So from day 1 to day 5, if you want to know where you're getting into ketosis, you should expect getting into ketosis somewhere around day 3. You're breaking that 0.5 millimolar range, you're into that green range that I was showing you earlier. And then, as compared to control, somebody trying to do it on their own, you should expect ketosis maybe on day 5. The moral of the story is that if you're trying to adopt it on your own, using information from this presentation too, you can get into ketosis fairly easily. But how do you maintain it? Or what does it mean to produce ketones? Ketones don't mean anything without context, and no diet truly does. And so this is the meat of the apex of the presentation. So what do we do with the basic information that we just talked about, and how do we make it translational? And so the purpose of our lab is really on a continuum. We take the basic science, we try to apply it on a treadmill, on a DEXA, on a metabolic cart, and then what sort of impact does it have in the real world? Weight loss, cancer, cycling, anything that you can imagine that you can use diet to provide or modulate something significantly that is relevant to you. And so these next few slides, I'm going to show you some of the studies that came out of our lab that were relevant to us, and we use the ketogenic diet to modulate performance outcomes and blood outcomes and weight loss successes. This was a study that we did with cadets in the ROTC department. We took 20 men, 25 men, 4 women, and we wanted to see if 12 weeks of a ketogenic diet could improve body composition. It did, and it actually improved body composition with a preferential loss of fat mass and a very minimal amount of lean mass lost was detected by the DEXA, which we figured out that it was actually some sort of a fluid shift. Compared to the mixed diet, the mixed diet ROTC cadets that were allowed to eat as much as they want, they didn't lose any weight, and they didn't improve their body composition. But the most interesting part is that performance stayed the same between them. So does anybody here power lift or like weight lift, or cares about your Wilks score? You care about your body weight to benching ratio or squat ratio? These guys got about 15 pounds smaller, and they still benched the same and squatted the same. You're in a new weight class now by maintaining your same power level. So, which is impressive, right? I mean, 180 to 165, that's a whole new powerlifting category by USAPL standards. Further on, we didn't just do performance. For example, metabolic syndrome. There's a great way to treat this even in absence of weight loss. We figured out a few years ago that weight loss has a meaningful impact on a lot of blood parameters. I'm not saying that you shouldn't lose weight and just use carb restriction. Well, we published a paper in JCI Insight, and we saw that the greatest improvement of metabolic syndrome maladies was in the carbohydrate restricted group. And that's what we did. We just turned the dial on carbs, we upped the dial on fat intake, and we kept calories the same. The goal was for them to not lose weight, to answer the question, what happens when you actually do not lose weight? And in the context of carbohydrate restriction, we saw that there was an improvement in HDL, triglyceride, and blood pressures and fasting blood glucose. That's 4 out of 5. You're no longer considered with metabolic syndrome. So that was a pretty fascinating study, and actually one of the most reviewed, the most cited publications we had in the past several years. Now let's go back to performance. So Zach Bitter, if anybody has heard of him, he's the current world record holder for the 100-mile indoor time. This man ran it in sub 12 hours indoor. I mean, not only him, but we've had other runners that came to the lab who were in ketosis for 2 years. And we put them on the treadmill, connected to a mask, and we figured out how well they are as fat burners. And so if you look at the graph where I have the yellow arrow, that is comparing the high carb athletes that have been high carb forever and low carb that have been low carb for 2 years. And you can see that the lowest rate of fat oxidation in the low carb group is still higher than the high carb group. They're twice as well as fat burners during a 3-hour time treadmill run. Now, remember the original slide I showed you with the big fat droplet and the glycogen droplet? 12 hours, your glycogen is expended within the first several minutes, right? You need something to keep you propelled forward. So unless you're gonna rehydrate or consume glucose during the race, you can use and tap into these endogenous fat stores to keep you going. 12 hours is not a trivial thing, and I think there's no running challenge that is greater than doing this, or, for example, an Ironman. Now here's a study that some of you might be familiar with because there's a poster in the lobby that discusses the results, and there are co-authors on this paper that are actually in this room. So this study was conducted in the building across by your very own Dr. Prince. And what we figured out is a novel way to test the responses within runners by feeding them for 6 weeks a low carb diet, and then we washed them out, their diet, I'm sure they shower at home. And then we take another 6 weeks and we put them on a high carb diet. What we found out is that only a few people were able to maintain their capillary ketone averages, and that's just because of how much they were actually expending and working out during that time. So remember, ketones are also a substrate for energy, and so we were able to get them into ketosis. They all maintained this 0.5 millimolar range, and furthermore, you see almost a lipid insult in the blood, and total cholesterol and LDL. But overall, there's a linear increase with this too. You see some changes in HDL, you improve the trigs, and then you improve the ratios that are sometimes used as risk markers in cardiovascular papers. And so this was an awesome study because you really don't get to see a lot of crossover studies done in this way. And if you want to expand on the work that was conducted by Dr. Prinz, I encourage you to go and maybe look at the data sets or look at samples where you actually can break down each marker and look at lipid-sized droplets. LDL has 7 classes, HDL has 3. You can send them out to a lab and do an NMR, and that could be your thesis. But I wanted to show you because this is a pride and joy, and we just got it published in time for the conference. I told you how you can increase your ketones using diet. Now, how do you can further increase your ketones using ketone supplementation. There are 2 big commercial ketone supplements on the market right now. You have esters and you have salts. And you don't need a PhD in chemistry to figure this out because I don't have one and I'm a dummy. So you can use either to raise your ketones acutely. One of them is kind of expensive, but it creates a nice area under the curve. That is esters. The salts are more commercially available, and you can mix them in water, and they mix just well enough in the water in front of you. And people usually can take it with a combination of amino acids and caffeine, and they're used in a lot of cycling studies. They're not as robust as the esters, but they're cheap, and they have a few minerals that can actually buffer your blood, which is kind of interesting because, if anybody takes beta-alanine or creatine or any other buffering agent, ketone salts offer you a moiety of supplements and solution that can not only provide the energy required for your low-carb metabolism, but also create a buffering effect that may improve exercise capacity. So in our lab, we were curious to see what the heck is a ketone salts. We landed a grant with a company out in California called Ketogenic, and we did a study where we were using these salts twice a day, but we wanted to make sure what is in these salts. So we sent out a sample to a lab, and we figured out that these commercially available salts are actually racemic. In the human body, we know what happens with R. We're really familiar with what happens with R and the metabolism of RBHB. We have no idea really what is going on with SBHB. We know it's kind of a signaling metabolite, but we have enzymes to capture R, make it into acetoacetate, and replenish ATP. And so, in those finger sticks, those Abbott finger sticks only read R. So, in other words, if you're taking 12 grams of ketone supplements in one dose, your finger stick only captures 6. So you really don't know how well in ketosis you are, but you can at least say, if I have 0.5 ketones and I went to 1, I'm realistically another half. I'm only 1.5. And we took it out to a lab to get it tested, and we found out that it's pretty reliable to measure this R as compared to a mass spec. Actually very reliable. It's almost 85% of the variation is explained by mass spec. So you have the freedom of having accuracy in these devices at home to measure ketosis, which brings me to why you should measure it in blood. this is the reliability evidence of why you should invest in a ketone monitor like a Mojo or an Abbott to measure your ketones. Another thing that came about on why using these ketone supplements was meaningful is that ketones are nitrogen sparing. So in other words, the more ketones that you make, the more nitrogen that you can hold on to during weight loss. If you look at the graph on the left, the first week when you're going into weight loss, you're decreasing glucose, which is anti-catabolic, right, much like insulin. But then there's a catch-up game after week 1 if you remain in ketosis. BHB tends to go up, and nitrogen balance is restored. So if you're in ketosis, the main takeaway from this slide is to be patient if you care about your retaining as much lean body mass as you want during dieting, because the catch-up game will eventually transfer to shifting the whole way that your amino acid pool is working. And so amino acids undergo recycling every single day. If we diet, we tend to favor this oxidation and gluconeogenic process. But if we have BHB in circulation, we tend to shift the amino acids back into the muscle and be able to rescue as much muscle as we can during diet, which is probably the most important outcome of dieting to begin with. You want to optimize fat loss, you want to improve lean mass retention. This was my thesis, published it a year ago. So remember what I said about the supplements, giving them twice a day? We noticed this effect of actually improving nitrogen retention. So if you look at the graph with the gray squares, this is being on a ketogenic diet without ketone supplements. The black dots are being on a ketogenic diet, consuming this supplement twice a day for 6 weeks. You see how the nitrogen curve got shifted down almost the whole point just by taking these salts alone? Well, we figured out that this may be a feasible strategy to consume these if you're struggling to maintain your ketones within a certain range. Furthermore, if you're interested in working out, you know about muscle breakdown and what you can measure to quantify muscle breakdown. 3-methylhistidine is an amino acid that gets transformed when you're working out intensely, and it's a byproduct of muscle degradation. What we found out is that with time on a low-fat diet, there was more 3-methylhistidine present in solution or in your blood than it was while consuming a ketogenic diet supplemented with salts. And it did not have an effect on body composition, which I'm glad, because I knew reviewer 2 was going to say something. I'm glad that it did not have an effect on body comp because we fed them calories weighed to the nearest calorie. Remember I told you I cooked for this study? Measured everything to the 0.1 of a gram, and we saw pretty uniform trends in body weight, fat mass, and lean body mass. So if somebody tells you that ketone salts improve fat mass, what do you tell them based on this graph? No, they have no effect on body composition respective to fat mass. No matter how many TikTok challenges there are there consuming ketone salts to improve your fat loss, it has no effect on fat loss. And it's physiologically sound. Because it shouldn't, because you're trying to control ketones so you don't trip over into ketoacidosis. Ketones inhibit the fat cell. If you have like 5 millimolar of ketones, you're inhibiting the fat cell, saying stop. I don't want more fatty acids. Done for now. You're at 0.5. Okay, ramp up the production. From a performance effect, we really didn't see many performance effects from the studies we conducted in the lab. What we saw was a increase in the time to exhaustion. So if you have a cycling race, for example, and you care about slapping on a CGM or a continuous ketone monitor, and you're trying to figure out times to refuel during a race, you can time this possibly somewhere in the middle of the race to manage your time to fatigue so you can finish the race at your peak performance. In other words, I'm not going to try to herald this supplement as the new breakthrough supplement in cycling research. But I will say that they're well tolerated, and they might have some positive influence in your total timed cycling race, in a 20 kilometer, 50 kilometer, or whatever you're interested in studying. So going from performance, I'm gonna come back a little bit to clinical. So we talked about salts, but ketone esters are so potent that they're used mostly in diabetes research. The reason they use it in diabetes research is that they provide these robust BHB curves that gives you enough time, almost 4 to 5 hours, to study what they're doing. So in other words, the pharmacokinetics of BHB esters. We did a study where we took them fasted, we took them fed, and we took them fed with just half of a supplement. You can see what a curve it has that peaks at 2 hours at the blue triangles of just taking it fasted. And that thing is sustained from the morning all the way to 5 hours later till you eat your lunch. And this has a meaningful impact on your blood glucose. So for somebody that's, for example, hyperglycemic, taking this ketone ester in the morning, maybe with breakfast, may lower your total glucose production during the day, which in other words, controls hyperglycemia. You can see, for example, from the fasted group, we've decreased blood glucose almost 15 points, right? What the threshold for prediabetes is 126. If you decrease it 15 points, you're within batting range from getting it under 100 and reversing the prediabetes course. Now, I'm not, again, supplementation is not necessarily supposed to take it on face value of having meaningful long-term physiological effects. This is temporary, but the temporary nature of this still extends to 5 hours. Imagine taking this twice a day. That's your diurnal habit. You fit 3 meals, you're taking this, and if you're having a poor time managing your blood glucose, it could be a strategy until you bring your glucose back into range without supplements. And so, I'm reaching close to the end of the presentation. This was, like I said, I promised. This was the most science relevant part of the discussion, and it was just to show you sort of the areas of work that we're most interested in working in. So to recap, we have cyclists, athletes, we have clinical populations, and military cadets. So there's a lot of areas that we've studied, but a lot that's left unexplored too. So for future work, this is in print, it's been unpublished. We've done a study where we were interested to study women with metastatic breast cancer. And so if any of you are familiar with this area of cancer, 5% of breast cancers are stage 4. And they don't get a lot of attention because the other 95% of stage 1 through 3 cancers get the biggest slice of the pie. So an understudied population. What we did was we put about 20 women on a well-formulated ketogenic diet. We provided their food daily. And we've done a lot of imaging with FDG PET, MRI, DEXA. And we found out two big take-home results. Ketogenic diet robustly modulated body composition. On average, they lost about 20 pounds of weight. Furthermore, most of the weight came from fat mass, about 75% of it. But what's interesting is that if you're familiar with cancer research, the fat to lean body mass is kind of dysregulated. Cancer patients that do chemotherapy tend to lose a lot of lean mass too, and it's not really 3 to 1. It's mostly 1 to 1. Where I had a patient one time, he was a neck cancer survivor. He did 3 months of monitored exercise, and for every 10 pounds of weight that he lost, 9 came from muscle and 1 came from fat. Right, 9 to 1. It was 1 to 9 ratio if you look at it from this way. This was 3 to 1. This is the type of ratio that you see in bodybuilding literature. There are some people that have a 2 to 1 if they don't maintain their protein intake or they do stuff during the diet that puts them in an even more calorie restricted design. But the only thing that explains it in this is the presence of ketones and the nitrogen sparing effect that we were talking about earlier. Furthermore, SUV is a standard that is used for the uptake of glucose into tumor tissues. And so this was the baseline. SUV max was, the number is not necessarily relevant for this conversation, but tumors love glucose, right? You can see with the FDG imaging that, well, the brain and the kidneys are obligate glucose consumers, or the CNS. But in the context of a ketogenic diet, look at the heart. It completely disappeared out of the image. She clearly still has a heart, at least we hope so. But it was 100% reliant on ketones. It wasn't even taking any glucose. It doesn't exist. The renal system still is taking out glucose, so is the brain, but even the brain coloration, may not see from the contrast, is still sort of fading too. So meaning that as you bump up ketones, glucose utilization comes down to save it for other processes. Furthermore, on the liver, if you look in this panel, she had 3 spots where it metastasized from the breast to the liver, absolutely no glucose uptake. This enables you, for example, using a rat model to make it even more translational, not really translational since it's a rat, but translational to clinical settings, you can improve the time that you have a patient alive and take care of her or him by just modulating diet. And we noticed that with ketogenic mice. Let's compare to control mice when they were injected tumors, much like the tumors that I was showing you earlier on the previous slide, they died 4 weeks later. With a ketogenic diet, these mice survived almost 6 weeks. It improved the lifespan about 50%. So this is meaningful in a clinical setting, because if you're in a hospital and you're dealing with a patient and you know that patient has about 6 weeks to live, just changing something as simple as diet can be meaningful enough to keep that patient alive on the bed so you can continue treatment. I want you to take this not necessarily as a ketogenic diets are a cure-all, fix-all for cancer. Do not misinterpret me or say that's something that I'm excited to show this sort of research, but we don't have an answer. Not a clear answer exactly what diet is best for cancer. But we're trying to figure out the story, and this is something that I encourage you that if you go into this line of work, there's strong evidence that diet really influences cancer outcomes. And so not only cancer outcomes, but diet also influences diabetes outcomes. And look what happens when you monitor people 2 years after getting them on a program to just monitor what they're eating, what their ketones are, and what their glucose is, excuse me. Diabetes medication can be absolved. Look at some of the medication here on the graph. I mean, insulin, for example, if you take 100 people, 50% of them by year 1 don't have to go and get insulin from the store. Right, that's, according to insurance, that's a few $100s that you save every month just by changing the way you eat. And so this clinically significant weight loss usually occurs about 5%. They went beyond that, almost twice beyond that. They went nearly 12%. So they're somewhere 2.5 beyond the goal. But the goal is, when we're going to publish some other papers in the future, is that we know that weight loss is kind of iffy to maintain. It's easier to achieve, just like this. But we're going to see how it is to monitor these patients year 3, year 4, year 5, because what we truly know is that the only successful intervention that has kept weight off of people has been bariatric surgery. And it's easier to change your diet than it is to be under the knife, which is why this sort of work is meaningful, because as long as you can control what you're eating, you can almost resolve metabolic diseases that have been previously treated with drug medication. And one of the satisfying things of being in this sort of field or research arena is that the more you publish, the more likely you are to move the needle. In 2019, the American Diabetes Association recognized low carbohydrate diets and very low carbohydrate diets, ketogenic diets, as an effective therapy for treating diabetes. And they stated exactly like I was stating it earlier on, a little more informal on my part, but they're formally stating exactly the outcomes that I've been showing you for the past half hour. A1C reduction, weight loss, body composition improvement, and exactly those blood lipids that we reviewed in the studies that I showed you. So this is very satisfying because we now have tangible backup of the work that we're doing and the meaningful impact of a basement lab taking it over and making it into the translational world. And so in the future, our team goals are fairly simple. We've had people from all over the world come to visit us. We've had funding coming from all the sources. During the Arnold himself came to the lab. We've been doing a study with strongmen, and if any of you are familiar with Ryan Shaw, The Mountain, Martin Lissage, I drew blood on all of them. They came over to the lab. Funny story is that when Arnold met me, I was in swim shorts because I was showing him the flotation tank that we have in the lab there. And I was about to step out of the tank so I could put some clothes on, and then there's Arnie, and I said, not even flexing. Where's my 2-week notice? These are my strategies. Anyway, he knew I was, he knew I wasn't Olympia material. So, to summarize everything, right? So, there's the whole take-home message that I want you to get, or take-to-home messages, is that everybody in this room has to balance two things in exercise science or physiology. You have one side that is highly analytical, right? We know how to do 1RM testing. We know how to do VO2 max. We know what an RQ is. We know what VO2 max fat peaks at. But the most important thing is what you take from here and you provide it to your family members, or you provide it and you explain your work to make it translational. Because people only care about what you're talking about or what I'm talking about if I can provide some context for a budget advantage, a taste advantage, how to design these sorts of macro and micronutrients. And most importantly, satisfaction, because if you're not satisfied how you eat, I don't think everybody should be eating a ketogenic diet. But what I do encourage is that if somebody's interested, why would I kill their motivation? I'd invite them to the lab and they can consult with the registered dietitian and they can talk about their options. If not, then so be it. I can't please everybody. But what I can do is make sure that that person that is interested in consuming a well-formulated ketogenic diet gets their best advice for their goals. With that being said, thank you very much. I didn't pull my OnlyFans up, but if you want to donate. Fun research.
Hey guys, we're gonna have 15 minutes for Q&A. So I think just raise your hand if you have any questions for.
Awesome work, Alex. Been following what you guys do for a long time. But just curious, you've done a lot of kind of validation of the ketone testing, serum measures, different devices. We have a pediatric trial we're starting on ketogenic diets for morbidly obese kids, but we're using one of these BioSense. It's breath, because it's just the kids probably don't want to be sticking themselves. But have you done anything head-to-head against these devices versus serum, or what's your take on the utility of that? We're just kind of like you, just trying to see if we can help these kids.
Yeah, there's a lot of variability in breath, unfortunately, but it goes device by device, so case by case. I would recommend that if you plan to use a device to measure ketones and breath, there's the breath acetone fraction. So remember, there's two main ketone bodies, that beta-hydroxybutyrate and acetoacetate, that, again, for chemistry nerds in here, it spontaneously decarboxylates. So BHB acetoacetate. The device that Dr. Cucuzella is holding is measuring acetoacetate. The one in blood is measuring BHB. Acetoacetate is a decent surrogate of ketonemia, and in that case, with the breath measurement, you'll more likely to get IRB approval in kids because you don't want to finger stick them. That's a huge limitation to just even get kids to be on a ketogenic diet. My final answer is, I would just look probably at some Bland-Altman plots if anybody has done it and tested it against the blood ketones. But so far, there's been some pretty good devices coming out, and I would recommend that for non-invasive use. So. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Something right.
Sure.
Kids out there in grade school, 0.0, right?
Yeah, because it's acetoacetate units, I think, and.
Yeah. Pretty well. It takes about 5 seconds for it to warm up, just blowing it.
Mm-hmm.
And the benefit of one of these, like for a child, is you can do this multiple times a day. There's no limit. Strips.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great point, but definitely the breath acetone realm is catching up to the blood realm as far as. Yeah, absolutely. No, that's a great point. Yeah. No, thank you for the question. Yeah. Mhm. Mhm. We're gonna test them in a few weeks coming up. No, that's great. It's exciting. The wearable field, it's getting smarter and smarter. So, yeah, that's a great point. I didn't include it in this, but that would be definitely for a continuous monitoring discussion. So, the future. Yeah, thank you for the question. Yeah. Oh.
So, from a weight loss perspective,
Mm-hmm.
you showed the slide about the diabetes reversal. It makes sense that way, thinking about kind of the reduction in glucose
Mhm.
and insulin response, things like that. Is there something special about a ketogenic diet for weight loss other than there's an argument out there that it basically, when you switch to higher fats, you increase satiety, and you ultimately just create a caloric deficit.
Mm-hmm.
Is there truth to that? Is there something special about switching from fats to carbs that actually helps us lose weight?
That's a great question. So, from a non-scientific perspective, it boils down to preference. Because if somebody's not adherent, it doesn't pass the nose detection test. I can already tell somebody that comes through the lab that will not be successful based on the comments that they make. Because if they conditionally say, I cannot give up this food group, it's an uphill battle to say to eliminate a food group. But if I word it in a sense, what do you like to eat? What do you prefer as cuts of meat? Do you favor veggies or do you not? Can you cook for yourself or can you not? Because this emphasizes a lot of cooking for yourself and being creative, albeit the limited carbohydrate options. But always the catalyst question of knowing if somebody's successful is if they're willing to make the switch and make it easy. Because the easier they make it, it's going to be a walk in the park. I've met people that have been on it for a week, and I've met somebody in an airport that was on it for 10 years. And he weighed 350 pounds, showed me pictures, and this is anecdotal, this is not peer reviewed. And he was 170 pounds. And he came to our conference, and he saw my poster, and I let him talk, and I had a great conversation with him. But these are the studies of me wanting to study people, what made you successful? And from a satiety point, to address that point on how we actually have that sensation of fullness, there's two types of satiety. So on this satiety camp, you have the stomach distension and the fiber and feeling full. On this side, you have the gut-brain axis, where all the peptides after consuming fat and all the lipases and cholecystokinin and on all the PYY that inhibit further eating on the brain. And so the way that you can really use this as a gauge, if you're trying to get somebody where you're a registered dietitian or you're working with a client one-on-one, is playing with the sliders and see how they are a month from now, 2 months from now, 3 months from now. Because even though they're in ketosis, you can actually manipulate their macronutrients, and once they get into ketosis, and where you can actually up their carbs a little bit, and they can still stay in ketosis. I've worked with the Columbus crew, for example. They're like insane calorie burning machines. We've had guys that would expend about 4,500 calories a day on training, and they were tolerating 90 grams of carbs a day and still being ketosis. Remember what I said on the slide, 20 to 50? Like that was kind of the ideal range that you can, that's arbitrary. But imagine 90, you split 30, 30, 30, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and that's still a tangible carbohydrate that you don't have to restrict. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, partly.
Okay.
So, is there something, I guess, specific about that causes people to eat though, maybe more than what we consider the kind of low-fat diet?
Yeah, from a, because weight is not just weight. Obviously, the whole sort of whoosh effect that happens within the first week is that remember, 1 gram of glycogen solvates 3 grams of water. If you delete about 400 grams of glycogen, that's about 1.6 kgs of water, so that's about 4 pounds of just mere water weight that you lose in the first week. So if you lose 5 pounds in the first week, realistically only about a pound would be of true tissue that you have lost using that diet. As compared to a low-fat diet, the slope is not as aggressive, but they can meet in the end, like I showed on that graph, at 6 weeks. Giving it about 6 to 8 weeks will truly tell you, including using a DEXA, how much fat and how much they lost and how much muscle they retained. When it comes down to just the diet portion, it's personal preference. Does that help? Okay.
I just shout it out. Alex, just from a long term, what you guys are doing with your lab, does it seem like you're transitioning long term? Like you want to follow these individuals, not just from an acute standpoint, the weight loss, but you know how sustainable, what happens physiologically, metabolically after several months, years, etc.
Mhm.
On this, is that what I heard is maybe going to be happening at the lab or somewhere where we want to go with research?
Yeah, that's time is a huge
Sure.
criticism, and I think short term, everybody has a definition of, I would say short term is something several months, or very short term is weeks, but short term realistically in a diet context would be several months. Verta has done cool things out to the 2-year mark,
Okay.
and I encourage you, if you would like to know some more about these whole metabolic parameters and the lipidomics, to go on the Verta website or read the paper that was published with Finney and Volek on all the 2-year outcomes of continuous monitoring with Verta, because that is the most tangible long-term effect that we've seen with ketogenic diets. And it's still going on. We're gonna have 3-year end results, or 4 or 5 years.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's it. For example, we were planning, this might be years down the road, but from a cardiovascular perspective,
Right.
it's a huge topic. I mean, we know what does on LDL, the subfractions, and we can answer some small LDL hypothesis questions with that. But it will really require about 5 years to be an empirical paper. I mean, it would be something that would create a lot of turning heads.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So like, whenever I hear about like the keto diet and like performance, I'm always like, they're always referencing like very like long distance like Olympic runners. How do you think it could benefit, you know, like an anaerobic athlete? Like, you know, you brought up like strongman, football players, sprinters, like any benefit there?
You know, that's, so from an acute, what substrate am I using when I'm weightlifting? Glycogen is a clear favorite because of the anaerobic nature of the sport, phosphocreatine and everything else. But it might be used as a tool for two big reasons, or actually a few, but the two major ones is people have used it to make weight while being in the context of keeping the same power to weight ratio, or improve the power to weight ratio while making weight. They can reverse out, and this is called a cyclical strategy. You're not really getting all those enzymes produced to sustain the fat metabolism, but do you really care? You only care squat, bench, deadlift, and getting 3 lights, that's it. That could be used as a tool. Secondly, it may improve maintaining a certain intake without feeling food deprived, but also improve that sort of distension, which in some weightlifters it may manifest as some discomfort while weightlifting, and then it's like you're putting the belt through the loops, and it's like, jeez, do I need to loosen it up again? And it takes your mind off of diet in that sense to maintain something in a low-fat context, where you can revert at any time that you want, like off-season or in-season. You know, you think about it as a tool more so than I'm gonna keep this lifestyle forever because I want to train anaerobically this way. Does that help a little bit? Yeah? Okay, so fewer scopes of anaerobic uses, larger, broader scopes of aerobic because of the nature of the intensity of the exercise. So. Yeah.
So when it comes to thinking about, like you talked about application and like people's preference and whatnot, but like when it comes to kind of maintaining a ketogenic diet over time in our like day and age, especially for someone who like is not super well off, like what do you think is kind of the plausibility of that? Like how available is it? Like you talked about some things that are being offered. Like do you think that's realistic at this point in time? If that's something they prefer.
Yeah, so the question is in the context of personal finances, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so there was a study done in New Zealand, US, and Australia that compared the cost of ketogenic diets or low carbohydrate eating as opposed to carb. That's a great question because grains are cheap. Per cent of calorie, you could get maybe 2 cents per calorie. But then when you talk about protein intake and something with high biologically available protein, you can get almost to like 8 cents or 9 cents per calorie. However, they looked over the course of a year and they said that the average expenditure, maybe not in the current economy, but in like a few years ago, they looked and they said that on a budget of about $6,000, you can have all your low-fat needs insured, and $6,500 for the ketogenic diet too. So there was no cost difference between the two if you know how to shop. If you don't know how to shop, you might be inclined to go and buy expensive cuts of steak and various cheeses that nobody can even pronounce. But in the end, if you're a smart shopper and you know how to shop outside of the market or the supermarket, you can keep that cost conscious and comparable to a low-fat diet. And I've noticed this from my personal shopping experiences. I don't mean to make it anecdotal, but some studies do show that the more you are conscious about your grocery bill, the better you can match it to a low-fat diet. Does that answer your question? Cool. What was that? Oh, yeah, go ahead.
What about like as college students, like studying in the cafeterias and trying to how do you
So we wondered that same thing at Ohio State. So when you're in the cafeteria, remember that one slide I showed you? So the gray line is cafeteria student. When we tried the trifecta meals, that is measure to the gram, you're eating this for 5 days, you're not deviating, not eating anything else. The gray line, by day 5, he broke into ketosis. So if you're in a cafeteria, you should expect that if you want to start Monday and you go around the cafeteria and you focus on the main groups that I was showing earlier, where was it? Oh, that's it. If you print this slide and you just have an idea of how a plate should look like for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, there's no problem. You can do it in any college campus cafeteria. As soon as you leave your parents' home, you're in complete control of your diet. This is your pantry, this is what you're gonna eat. You can implement any diet in the world that you want. I'll be surprised if you can't. Then I could sue. You might get some money. Does that answer your question? If you do it, let me know what ketones are. We'll put you up on the board next year.
Yes, any other questions for Alex?
Yeah. Go ahead. So, broad question, so I'm gonna try to be like no, it's good, but this is probably like one of the, this is very tough. It's almost a committee-like question, because like I said before, it's not a cure-all, end-all, but what we know about tumor tissues is that this Warburg effect, this nasty effect where it's feeding off of glucose and to grow bigger and bigger. So it's using this carbon substrate to just get grossly large where not even chemotherapy can tap into. However, when you restrict carbohydrates, you're one, restricting the net glucose that enters your system, thereby reducing the glucose in the blood. But you're also reducing the insulin concentration in the blood, which is known that in tumor metabolism literature, insulin signaling is impaired. So imagine if you cannot communicate well with the tissue, and then you're flooding 300 grams of glucose through your mouth of orange juice, hospital orange juice, and you can't do anything with it. It's obviously going to remain sustained in blood, and then it's going to shunt to the tumor tissue. This isn't the most basic explanation ever. There's different types of cancers. For example, it's not recommended for colorectal cancer because the fat load will posit a huge or negative load on the colorectal outcomes. But in breast cancer, it seems that there might be some efficacy. So go case by case. If you're interested in this literature, review the literature and see what cases have been managed well with dietary interventions first, and then carbohydrate restriction. Good? Bye.
I guess, I think Alex will probably hang up, a little bit afterwards.
Yeah.
If you have any questions for him, but probably we should transition over. Thank you, Alex.
Yeah, no problem.
Just so you guys know, he's right, like, read this literature. The budget question, from a grant, and you can pull this up online for free. We wrote a book called Low Carb on Any Budget. So tinyurl.com/low carb any budget. It's like a 50-page PDF with recipes that you could take to the Dollar General store and eat a somewhat well-formulated low carbohydrate diet with frozen broccoli, eggs, bacon, meat, canned tuna, canned chicken. So it can be done. These are implicit biases people have against carbohydrate reduction. The one place on the college cafeteria question, the sad place where it's very unsafe to eat in school, where would you guess that is? That they don't have control. You probably went there. Your own local grade school. Yeah, your own local public elementary school and a Title IX school. Kids will get 200 grams of carbohydrates at breakfast and lunch and then go home to pizza and Mountain Dew. And they can't control that. Sad. I've testified twice on the Senate floor to the USDA Scientific Advisory to the Dietary Guidelines Committees, and it's 75 lobbyists and 5 clinicians. That's why things don't change. So go change the world. Don't give up. You're gonna get them over there. Well, they just loaded another kind of comment to you over there. So I have a clinic that does carbohydrate reduction, medication reduction, almost 100% diabetes patients. And people say, well, this trial, but if you have a patient in front of you, and don't ignore this type of research, they're called N of 1 experiments. What's an N of 1 experiment? You. Yeah, like if you're curious about something, read the literature and try it. Because every patient in front of you is an N of 1 experience. And apply that science. So, yeah.
Sit more.
Hey guys, so next up we have Dr. Mike Cucuzella. He has an MD and is a retired lieutenant colonel in the Air Force Reserves and is currently a professor at West Virginia University. He was a contributor in the development of the MedChiefs program at WVU School of Medicine and the developer of the U.S. Air Force Efficient Running Program. His other outstanding achievements include a 2:24 marathon time, the titles of Distinguished Mountaineer, Air Force Athlete of the Year, Colorado Academy of Families Physicians Teacher of the Year, and induction into the Marine Corps Marathon Hall of Fame in 2018. So, y'all would like to join me in welcoming Dr. Cucuzella.
I want to thank you all. This is fun. It's a privilege to come up here and chat with young learners. I teach a lot of med students, residents. So really, you guys are the future. I want to thank Phil for inviting me up. You know, just getting a random email, you know, for someone who's really passionate about this space of human metabolism, human health, and kind of combining that with a little bit of human performance. So kind of my world, and you know, so that's what we're going to talk a little bit about today. Kind of like Alex, I'm not going to make this like I don't think I have any scientific studies on this. But if you wanted to read some studies, I'm glad to share all kinds of stuff with you. So my topic, and actually wrote a book that was published a few years ago called Run for Your Life, kind of a journey. I mean, a little bit of that was about nutrition, but just really about how to live an overall healthy human life. And a little bit of it was about running, but it's not really about running. Disclosures, I own a small shoe store. Sells most of these minimal shoes. Talk a little bit about that, wrote a book. And the proceeds of my book go to a nonprofit which builds trails at local elementary schools. I also direct running races, which is a difficult job, but it's giving back, it's fun. You know, we won't go through objectives, but we're going to go through some movement stuff, a little bit about food stuff, stress and recovery. I think one of the things about this low-carb space, low-carb ketogenic diets, is how many of y'all have been kind of sore after workouts next day? You got domes and like there's a whole industry about recovery. And what if you do low carbohydrate eating? There's something about low carbohydrate eating, and maybe it's the ketones. Alex knows more about the science. But what you notice is what you don't notice. Like you're not sore. It's pretty crazy. Full disclosure, I have a condition called maturity onset diabetes of youth. It's on the type 1 spectrum. So in about 3 days after wearing the glucose monitor at an Air Force base in about 2012, almost medically discharged, but being able to bring my glucose back in a non-diabetes range without medication where I would have been boarded, I started on pretty much 20 grams. I've lived for 10 years now on about 20 grams of carbohydrates a day or a glucose monitor, because if I eat any more than that, I'm fully diabetic. So if I stay in that space, I can keep my A1C out of that full diabetes range. And that's where I will live for the rest of my life. I mean, you know, I'm eating what's called a human diet, right? I'm eating plants and animals. You know, I'm eating that's like what is in my DNA. I'm not worried about, gosh, you know, what's that going to do to me in the next 30 years? I mean, I'm actually pretty confident. I have a coronary calcium score of 0. You know what that means? So I don't have any plaque on my arteries. And someone at a conference, a few months ago, you know, there's always some debate about the eggs, and you know, I said, well, I've been eating about 4 to 6 eggs a day since my diagnosis. They actually calculated how many eggs I've eaten. I had my calcium score done like a week before that with 0, so I guess I'm pretty safe. It was like, I don't know, someone add up 5 eggs a day for 10 years. I forgot the number. but it was insane. I mean, that's like a lot of eggs. I haven't fed the chickens, but you can ask me some questions about that. But I'm a doctor, I'm a medical doctor, and I'm working this Western medical system, which is not a health care system, it's a disease care system. And we wait till people are diseased before we intervene. But when should we intervene in human health? As soon as you're not optimal, right? So that's where you are, right? As soon as you, in your own health, okay, I got to sort it out, right? Because the idea is, to die young, as late as possible. Ken Cooper was an Air Force flight surgeon, and he called it squaring off the curve, right? Stay young as long as possible and drop dead one night. I occasionally I'll actually see someone in year 2020 who dies of natural causes. Right? They died of nothing. How many of y'all one day just want to die of nothing? Yeah, I want to die of nothing, right? And maybe in your family, I'm sure there's some, farmers, some Mennonite Amish farmers out here who will die of nothing. It's pretty cool. So we're actually going to go through a little bit more of the movement side and make it simple. Then maybe talk a little bit about food. So what things are important, for you and, if you're working with patients, clients, your family. Posture and breathing, I think, is pretty much ignored. Everyone just stand up a minute, right? You can sit and just stand up. Very good. Posture. Dalton's going to come around here. And I'm just going to just see how Dalton's posture is. He's kind of tall and strong. Because your body has to take a load. And I'm going to come behind Dalton. And he actually comes back a little bit. So I'm going to make a little adjustment with Dalton here. It's a little better. Yeah, he's like, what the hell? I mean, he's strong. He's like, this dude could deadlift 3 times what I could deadlift. Sure. I do deadlifts, but so he was a little bit back here, right? Just a little bit subtle. This was his natural position, and he's like, "I'm good. This is where he should be." If you actually put a heel on the human body, it affects your posture, right? And what becomes natural is what you do every day. It's how you fire is how you wire. So this posture becomes the norm. And in the military, the most common disability is low back pain, because they're rucking and carrying load, and they're just off a little bit here, right? But you add that up over, Jeff worked with them, I've ruck marched with these special forces guys, man, 60, 80-pound rucks, and man, if your posture's not pristine, it's not going to be good. So work on your posture. Just take that, maybe that's a takeaway. You can sit down unless you don't want to sit down. So a good posture activates our core. What is the key stabilizer? What muscle is a key stabilizer that if this muscle is dysfunctional, and you're doing a running sport, a jumping sport, you hit the ground, you're going to be like, how many of y'all have been like running and you're just like, this sucks, right? Everyone, right? You're running like, oh, this sucks, right? And then you just get tall and you're like, watch, embrace your inner canyon. Yes, it's called a diaphragm, right? So if you diaphragm breathe, right? The diaphragm is this massive inner core stabilizer. So if you feel like, oh, this sucks, just get the victory, get yourself in good posture. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Learn how to use your diaphragm. Practice this, right? So you can lay on the ground, just put a book, just practice, 14 seconds out. In through your nose, fill your belly, and then you get yourself, everyone just kind of get yourself kind of in a wonky posture like this, right? Slow breath, try to breathe out. In through the nose, fill the belly. Now, kind of victory, get tall, Yeah. Now, almost like you're blowing a kazoo. Okay, we use your diaphragm now. Right, texting position. You guys got it, right? Balance. I mean, y'all, why is it essential that we maintain our balance? I see a lot of old patients. What do old patients do when they lose their balance? Fall. Hey, fall. Doesn't matter, Jack, what your bone density is. When you're 80, if you fall, you break your hip. So what is the best preventive strategy to not fall? Is it the pharmaceutical intervention of Fosamax, or is it what? Don't fall. Maintain muscle mass and maintain balance. Weight-bearing exercise. little hops, right? But you've got to have balance, right? So practice your balance, right? You could be, answering your text messages, standing on one foot, typing, talking on the phone. But just do whatever you can do, standing in line at the cafeteria, just anything you can do to maintain your balance is good. The less that's between your foot and the ground, the easier it is to balance. Actually, got a big pad of foam under your foot, right? That's, you all do ankle rehab, right? So you're trying to balance yourself on an unstable surface, but you always start on a stable surface, right? And then you progress to an unstable surface. So the world's a stable surface, but you're out there doing turf sports, right? A lot of times that's an unstable surface. You got to progress your training to that. But these are just things, and this isn't about young collegiate athletes. This is about our elderly patients, your parents, all that stuff. And then you've probably seen some of these drills. So these are just simple progressions. You can teach people right in the office. You don't need a PT gym. The foot. How many think the foot's really important in movement? Oh gosh, yeah. I mean, you hit the ground, everything changes. The foot is the foundation. And we pretty much, how much education do you think I got in med school on the foot? Like nada, right? Nothing at all. We did anatomy lab and we learned there was 100 muscles, 26 bones, 33 joints. Most of them are triplanar joints. They're pretty complicated. And then we went on to, let's look at some simpler stuff. Look at the liver now. Yeah, so do these little exercises through the day. Explore your feet. Just feel the ground. It's grounding. My friend back there was talking about grounding. Yeah, so we see this. I own a running store, right? So what is the most common condition that comes into the running store? Plantar fasciosis, right? Who's had plantar fasciosis? Right? Yeah, it sucks, right? And it just doesn't go away. Yeah, more arch support, more arch support, more arch support. Right? If we keep supporting a structure, a limb, a joint, what happens to that joint? Does it get stronger or does it get weaker?
Gets gums.
Yeah. It gets weaker, right? Yeah, then we support it more and it gets more weaker. Support it more, it gets more weaker. Right, so in any, rehab, so we support for protection, then you wean support and add strength. So the ultimate goal is to wean support and add strength. Whether it's your ankle, your knee, your shoulder, whatever it is. The big toe is really important. If you have a big stiff shoe and you can't bend your big toe, the big toe creates a windlass mechanism that brings your arch back into this magical kind of locked position so you take off on a stable surface. So you want to have a mobile big toe. Big toe needs to be in alignment because when the big toe is not in alignment, the foot tends to collapse. And then, what happens when we jump and our feet collapse, right? You get this knee valgus. What's the most common injury, especially in female jumping sports? That's almost a career ender. Some of you probably had it. What is that injury? Non-contact, pop, ACL, right? Anyone in here had their ACL? Contact or non-contact?
Non-contact.
Non-contact. Yeah, most are non-contact. And only about 25% of people from ACL repairs come back to the same level of strength and performance as they did before their ACL. This is a big deal. It's a big deal. Yeah, so big toe is really important. If you have a condition where you have, Alex Buga recovered, the big toe, you can get things like toe spacers to try to correct that. I had an operation 20 years ago because my foot looked like a track spike after many years of running around in circles in these skinny track spikes. We didn't know jack in college either running. We just put these shoes on and ran, and we were broken all the time. And about 20 years ago, my toe looked like this, and I didn't know anything. Everything was broken, so they went and took some bone out. Somewhat straight, but it's not perfect. They still use these little spacers. But yeah, this is what happens to the knees. If your big toe is bent in your knees, you land, right? No good, right? That's not a good way to land. Yeah, you can, I don't know if you took your shoes off now and maybe during this lecture, we're going to do some yoga, right? We call it toe yoga. So when everyone, sometimes they do this, take your feet out of your socks and lift up your big toe, stab the other foot. We all can use our hands. But then I watch adults, I say, lift up your big toe, and the brain is trying to figure that out. Because it's still in this coffin. Right, so then there's another really good exercise too to kind of wake up the foot spring. It's called a short foot posture. You're kind of like a dome with your foot. Because, why is it important to have this foot in this beautiful tripod position? So what's the foot do? It's a spring, right? It's a spring. right? In the old days, you know, the boxers be able to do that for hours and hours and hours, and they weren't using any energy because they weren't using any energy. Basically, they're like sprigs, right? You know, Muhammad Ali do that for hours, you know, jabbing, talking to Cucuzella and stuff. But if you're gassed in like a minute of jump rope, that means you're using your calf muscles. I mean, you don't want to do that. You know, all the little kids go do that for hours. And these back when I was growing up, I don't know what they do now. This is a little exercise you can do, you know, 6 foot, you know, walking your dog, feet in, feet out, outside, inside, heel toe. Just do stuff to use your feet, just like you would use your hands. Do some barefoot training, right? So once you've adapted your foot, adapted your you know, kind of sensation in the skin, go do a little bit of barefoot training. It's not dangerous. If I heard one more time, aren't you going to cut your feet when you run barefoot? So what do we have if they work properly? That I've run barefoot for 10 years, you know, in the summer, not in the winter, but I run barefoot on streets, grass, all kinds of surfaces. So what do I have on my body right now that prevents me from stepping on glass?
Eyes.
I have eyes, yes, I got these eyes, so I don't run barefoot in darkness across fields, right? To safe, smooth places, safe grassy places. This is what shoes do to your big toe. This is a military shoe, and that's the same foot, you know, without a shoe, but years and years of that. You know, so stable, unstable. You want your foot to look like a foot, not look like a shoe. If your foot looks like a shoe, you better do some work. You know, also we see a lot of these conditions called hammer toes, you know, where the toes are kind of clawed up. So if you're in a shoe that ramps up your toes over years, you know, what happens is these long extensors that attach up here, they start to shorten. Right? So there's a lot of soft tissue massage stuff that can get you out of that, you know, toe extensor stretches. But the quicker you identify this, you know, the quicker you correct it, you know, then because you need your toes really to be able to function and you know, have that springing mechanism. That's a problem solution. You know, sandals are wonderful to run in too. You know, once you get your feet adapted to this, you know, it's actually like less energy to be using these, you know, minimal shoes or sandals. This is a 50-mile trail run, you know, with these little sandals, which were about as, you know, thinner than this thing. But yeah, and then you don't get sore. Like you're not sore at all. It's pretty crazy. Sitting. Yeah, we sit too much, right? These are the muscles, right, that shorten. Iliacus, psoas, rectus femoris, all that stuff. Don't sit too much. How many of y'all sit too much? All right. Who has a stand-up desk? Yes, get a stand-up desk. Stand in the back of the class. Or you saw me standing over there and been sitting 4 hours already today. I didn't want to sit too much more. So stood up. Yeah, so you can, you know, just MacGyver your situation and sit less. You know, there's even back ways you can sit too. You know, say you have a chair and you can, you know, you didn't want to be the freak standing in the back. You know, you can sit on the side of a chair like this. You know, and it just opens your hip up a little bit. You could even try that. Yeah, this chair's a little tall for me to do it right. But, you know, say you're just in class or at dinner because, you know, you're just, and then you got to go perform, right? Because when all this is really tight, your glutes are like to shut off, and then you got to go practice later. No good. You know, we see this a lot with lower back, right? The whole pelvis, because all this stuff is tight. You know, their whole pelvis is kind of in this anterior tilt. And then they run or take load, and now they're getting all of this shear force in their lumbar column because their posture is off because of the tight hips. You know, it's all connected. Swiss balls are really nice to have too, to balance. Just mix it up, you know. Your best position is your next position, they would say. You know, and okay, we all sit just in chairs. Maybe you all spend some time just sitting on the floor. Yeah, when you go to other parts of the world, there are no chairs, right? They have no back. They're doing nothing. Just spend some time sitting on the floor, right? Because you want to be 90 years old and be able to get up off of the floor. That's really all I'm training for right now is 55. I can call it the Centenarian Olympics, right? I want to be able to carry my groceries up a couple flights of stairs to get my sorry ass up off the floor. And die of nothing. The odds are against us now. Right? We're living in America. You know, the odds are against us. You know, sit this kind of alternate Indian style that you can do different hinges, neutral spine. Just find like a routine that can get you unlocked where you're locked. walking, right? Is there a right way and a wrong way to walk? Oh yeah, there is, right? So if you learn to walk right, learn to walk before you run. Yeah, so walking. How many of you all kind of done like what's called museum walking, right? It's really tiring. You know, when you have to stop a lot, it's tiring. And then when you really kind of, can get out there and really walk, and you can walk all day. So how many of you find the faster walking more tiring or the museum walking more tiring? Which is more tiring?
Museum.
Yeah, the museum walking more tiring. Why is the museum walking more tiring when you're walking really slow versus the ruck march style of walking? Not natural. What tissue are we really kind of activating and loading, if we're really walking and striding out? Am I using my muscles a lot, or what else am I using? I'm sorry? Inertia, yeah, starts with an F and ends with an A. This is like a hangman word. F-A-S-C-I-A. Fashion. Right? It's all the fascia. Fascia is how we move, right? So, yeah, you load your fascia correctly. That's the magical springs, right? If you're kind of short, right, you're not really, it's like I've got a slingshot and I'm going to go peg Alex or something, right? So if I load the slingshot good, right, it's like energy just returns if I'm kind of not loading that slingshot right. Yeah, so, if you really kind of stride it out, right, we can really load all this fascia, the leg just comes right back and, you can walk fast that way, right? But, if you're in like really thick kind of shoes, you can't, your foot and your Achilles tendon are magical fascia slings. You can't really use those. So, work on walking around campus in something that's more flexible, and you'll start to just feel that. You'll start to feel that foot, all the fascia, the plantar fascia, the Achilles tendon, all your hip flexors, all that stuff will just start to work. If you're a runner, and you've been wearing big, supportive, bulky shoes, do you think you want to just throw those away and start running in 5 fingers the first day? No, right? Of course, right? Your body has to adapt to whatever situation or any training load. If you're applying a new or different load, right, you got to just slowly adapt. If I heard one more time, gosh, they put on 5 fingers and they got hurt, therefore it's the 5 fingers that hurt them. Well, what did they do the first day they got 5 fingers? Well, they went out and ran 10 miles. Is that smart? No. Every day somebody's wearing traditional running shoes gets hurt, but that's never blamed on the traditional running shoes. So, tensegrity, how many of y'all heard of this term? Yeah, if you're in exercise science, read this one book. It's called Anatomy Trains Thomas Myers. Okay, get the book, read the book. It'll change everything you think about movement. Tensegrity, tension, integrity. So, yeah, it's called Anatomy Trains. I mean, there's there's all kinds of books about fascia, and about how that really affects all of our movement and performance. And really, the low-carb, higher-fat diet really is good for fascia, right? It's like magical fascia. So tensegrity is tension and integrity. So when the body's in the right position, it can load correctly. If the body's here, so you're always in a good position, and then that's the ready position. You watch a world-class runner, right? You're like, it looks easy. Like watching a Kenyan runner, an African runner, right? It looks easy. Because it is easy for them. I mean, they're using, a lot of energy, but the movement is easy because, like, their body is always in this perfect slingshot position. Hip extension. Just they fly forward. Tigger, right? Tigger, remember Tigger? Did you guys ever watch this too? Yeah, Tigger us, right? Stringy. Mobility and stability basics. Right? Great Cook talked about most stability. You actually want to have stability before mobility, right? We're all stretching. Back in old school, right? We did sports. Like we stretched and stretched and stretched because somehow we thought that was good. But we really didn't work on stability. Because you have to stabilize forces, right? You really have to stabilize forces. Yeah, so fill on mobility here. How many of y'all have some kind of rolling routine, things tight? Yeah, now should everyone's rolling routine be the same as the other person's? You find out where your issues are. So my morning routine involves a lot of rolling of, hip flexors, quads. It tends to be because I do have to sit too much because I see patients in clinic and you do have to sit in front of them and then you walk with the patient. Hospital and walk more. But yeah, PSIS is another area. mobility, we're all kind of forward, right? So, but we really have difficult time when we run and walk getting our leg behind us. So just doing things like leg swings, right? So running and walking are pendular motions, but we're all really restricted in hip extension. So that could be an area that you want to do some mobility. Ankle and calf is another area that people are really deficient in their movement. A lot of that's just because of these big, thick, elevated heels. They have very limited, calf mobility. You can do like knees over toes. That's another good assessment. Can you actually squat down and bring your hamstring all the way to your calf? As you work this stuff, hip extension, you can assess yourself. So if you lay on a bench and pull your knee up, is your thigh actually going to come off of the table? We use this test in just a clinical exam. Rolling the calf's really good. All kinds of stuff. Quad test. Can you actually bring, if you're on the ground on the yoga mat, can you bring your ankle all the way up to your butt? So these are some assessments. Can you actually get down into a deep squat? I think that's actually a really good assessment. If you can't get down into a deep squat, okay, where's your limitation? Most people it's kind of ankle, calf, but some people it's hip mobility. So everyone should just find the path and be able to get down into a deep squat. We see people squat, right? They all want to be here, but you want to kind of see how when you squat there, your shins, and this all should be pretty parallel when you squat. So kettlebell can help you kind of work that position. Keep that kettlebell really close. So you're holding a dumbbell is actually a better way, I think, to train it. Because if you're holding a dumbbell and the little bottom part of the dumbbell comes off of your chest, you're in the wrong position. So it'll just kind of cue you to be in the right position. Wall squats. So many of us are so tight here, like you stand up against a wall, and can you actually just squat all the way down? And like, where's your restriction? But so many people, it's kind of here, right? They're all so tight here. So anything you can do during the day that gets you kind of in that old school victory position, right? Kind of just finding that. That gets your shoulders in the right position. So if you have to lift, you can stack properly instead of forward. T-spine, a lot of us are really forward in your T-spine. So doing some things like you get your T-spine. Laying down on a long foam roller feels really good because it gets our head and neck, right? A lot of us are here. If you just lay down on one of those long foam rollers, just for a few minutes and just kind of get your head almost like a gentle traction, feels really good. I'm doing kind of a windshield wiper movement with your hips, really good. Because when we run and walk, we think it's all extension of the hip, but we actually have to have some internal rotation too to get full hip extension. And we lose that as we get older. Our capsules are filled with fascia. That's like frozen shoulder, hip capsules. So that stuff just gets old and crusty as we get older. So you've got to work this stuff to keep the mobility there. Doing mountain climbers is just a wonderful exercise just to open those hips up and keep that spring, but do them correctly. Really, what you're doing is really sinking this back hip if you're doing a mountain. I mean, you'll feel it. This is the spring, so you're kind of feeling that spring. It should be nice and springy. This is another exercise you can do. We can't really demonstrate that, but couch stretch. Maybe y'all have heard of the couch stretch. Kelly Stewart, yeah. Question or just know about the couch stretch? Yeah, you can just stick your leg up against anything. You just be answering your text messages or something. So find time to work this kind of stuff into your day as you're sitting through class and you're sitting in the library and sitting through your homework. So this will test your rectus femoris. So bringing here, or being able to, rectus femoris crosses two joints. So iliacus and psoas is crossing just one joint, but then to be able to really get full kind of knee flexion there, you have to have a very mobile rectus femoris. Gait retraining, there is full disclosure, there's no perfect way to run. Do you think there's a perfect way to run? Do you think everyone should land on the ball of their foot? No, there's many ways to run. And the best runners actually have a lot of variability in their stride. If you watch like a world-class marathoner, right, at mile 9, a lot of them are touching gently on their heel and they're rolling. They're just rolling along. But what's the goal of mile 9 in a marathon? Marathon's 26 miles. To chill, right? Efficiency, just chill. Now, usually, like the ones who are still in the game, 1 mile to go, right? And they're canyon runners with the track background, they're up on the ball of their feet. Because at that time, it's like the money's on the line, and that's when they really engage that extra spring, and they get that extra preflex, but they can't do that for 26 miles. So they're constantly they don't even know they're doing this. It's unconscious competence. They're just constantly micro-adjusting things. But what we do know from the lab is to prevent injuries. We don't want this, so if you land hard on your heel on an outstretched foot, right? So everyone just stand up for a minute. Okay, so just on mine, just kind of go springy, right? 1, 2, 3, 1. Now lock your knees out and land on your heel. Good, right? Now, if you have a big cushy shoe, you can get away with that. But that impact transient, again and again and again and again and again, talk about compartment syndrome, stress fractures. It's no bueno, right? It shouldn't take science to let you know that this is pretty good, right? It's soft, it's springy. Stop, right? And then you've just lost all that energy, right? Now you've got to apply all that, usually lower extremity to get off the ground again. So it's just, however you land, right? You go to the gym and you hear people on the treadmill and it's like thud, thud, thud. I guess I don't, no good, right? No, they should be soft. And you could be 280-pound lineman, CrossFitter, and these guys run like ninjas, because they're great. They have perfect body mechanics. It has nothing to do with how big or small somebody is. But that's really all I want to get people to do is learn how to land soft, learn how to be able to harness this Achilles tendon. The Achilles tendon really is a spring, right? It's the largest spring in the human body. Probably what separates us from animals that cannot run that also have 2 legs. This is no Achilles tendon, so you can outrun really any animal on the planet for endurance. How many of y'all have heard of this term pronation? Yes, is pronation a disease and bad, or is it a natural human movement essential for normal foot function? It's normal, right? So we land on the outside of our foot and we roll in off the big toe. So it's kind of rolling in movement, we load the arch and we spring off the ground. So it's okay. Now that movement, there's a safe range of that pronation and supination, and there's an unsafe range. It's like everything, it's not good or bad, there's safe ranges of it. If you don't have any neuromuscular control of your lower extremity, you've got all this weakness in your feet, and you have a big toe that's bent there, your foot is just going to collapse right into the ground. It's not a controlled pronation. But the best African runners, if you watch their medial malleolus, it's like on the pavement. Right? Their foot is like rolling in. And you're like, wait, they should be in an orthotic. But then you step back and you say, well, wait, they just set the world record running like that. So that's a disconnect, right? If it was a medical problem that needed a correction, wait, they just set the world record. I guess it's probably, my null hypothesis needs to be, not that's wrong, my null hypothesis, that must be optimal, because they just set the world record, and they were drug tested. Hip extension, right? Like if we don't have hip extension when we walk and run, we just shut off our key gear, and then you use your glute. So if you don't have hip extension, glute maximus, right? Most powerful, that's the engine room, right? You gotta have some junk in the trunk. So glute max, you gotta have hip extension, and then that allows knee drive. So, that's a little bit about more efficiency in running and as you get speeds, but actually what we teach people is to run soft and run slow, because really the health aspects come from really the slow jogging. We take military troops and we just teach them, take their shoes off, and just jog really slow. Because what they're doing there is they're just teaching their body how to run with a little rhythm. Because when they go out and run, 40% of women, 25% of men who enter the U.S. Air Force basic military training have to be removed for a musculoskeletal injury that's been inflicted under supervised duty time. Does that sound good? No, we are causing the injuries, right? Because what they do is they're young and they want to look good. And they go out and they pound themselves every day. That's no good, right? No. So we want to like slow them down and just teach them how to, tap, run easy. And then the most important thing is when they run easy and they're like running around the track, I got videos of this stuff. It's fascinating. They smile. They laugh. So what are they having? Starts with an F and ends with an N. They're having fun, right? It doesn't suck. So, how many of y'all does running suck? Yeah. And if you go to any Army basic training, you guys like to run? Oh, F no, right? No, running sucks. But no kidding, you got to run your whole career. You're going to have to do this stuff. So you got to make running not suck for you, or else you're not going to enjoy it. All right. Yeah, slow and steady with the race. Food matters. Alex really covered this, right? Because we got this big electric engine, right? We've got fat-burning metabolism, so we want that. We want to tap into fat burning. We got a little bit of glucose in the tank. They say this low-carb diet's an extreme diet. Is this an extreme diet? No, it looks delicious. Then I'll go to these medical conferences, including this morning at West Virginia University. The only thing out there was Panera, bagels, muffins, cinnamon rolls. So luckily, the little hotel I had some bacon and eggs, so I ran back over to the hotel, and I had some little plate of bacon and eggs I snuck over to the conference. People were like, where'd you get that? Back in my hotel, because there was not a single thing that wasn't 100% carbohydrate. Shit, we're the number one obese and number one diabetic state in the nation, and these are the people at the medical school. This is a faculty retreat at the medical school, the most obese state, most diabetic state. That's where we're at, right? This is a military conference, I'm giving a talk on ketogenic diet, and I had to eat the butter. There was not a single thing. I'm diabetic, right? So like 20 grams of carbs raises my glucose 8 points. I don't want to do that. Yeah, this is what I do in clinic. I've got tons of slides of these because they're trying to share their story. This guy walked into my stress test lab. His sugar was 500, A1C 12.2. Had no idea even what diabetes was. Seen him multiple docs. He had meds he was taking, not taking. 3 months, only a medicine called metformin, and his A1C is 5.9. And he's like, he actually I love this. He texted me the other day, what's it take to be a dietitian? Because he's like fascinated. He's like, I want to go back to school. I want to be a dietitian. He's smiling under that mask. He's lost like 40 pounds of belly. He's got a 1-year-old. He's not going to die. He's not going to die. That guy will die. Right? He's 42. Right? A1C to 12. That dude's life expectancy is less than 3 years. He'll die cardiovascular. Right? This is what I say to my patients. You're at a fork in the road. There's a way you can get healthier. Do you want to know about that? Or we can just give you medications. Sure, Doc, tell me about that. Well, the way to get healthier is just eat plants and animals. You like meat, you like eggs, you like bacon, you like non-starchy veg. How's that sound? You don't need to be hungry, you don't have to count calories, you're not going to diet, you're not going to starve. How's that sound? You want to give it a go? Sure, I'll give it a go, and I'll support you. I'll put a glucose monitor on your arm. I give out hundreds of these things, and I follow them on my own phone. So I'm here, and I'm going to help you. What's missing in healthcare is something called compassion. What is compassion? Love for another, right? Empathy is, man, your life sucks and I feel your pain. Compassion, how is compassion different than empathy? Yes. Yes, empathy, I feel your pain. What is compassion? It's critical if you're ever going to help someone.
Do change, like what are you going to do about it? So
Yeah,
you feel something for somebody, but what are you going to do about
What
it?
what are you going to do to help me, right? So if you're the doctor, the clinician, I feel your pain and I will do everything to help you. I'm here to help you. You have my text message. I'm going to put a glucose monitor on you. I will do everything I can to help you. That's the difference. And I think without that, we can't fix diabetes because I can't just give a pill and make you come back get a strep throat, 10 days antibiotic. But that's just things for discussion. We're not going to go much into the insulin resistance stuff because Alex talked about all that. But the world's a mess. Carbohydrates. I'll just stop here. Right, yeah, so what Americans eat is like all ultra-processed, right? So we're just eating. So ultra-processed food, if you look biochemistry world, Krebs cycle world, what does this do? It's not even food. It doesn't even hit the normal biochemical processes that make ATP. So it's calories, but it's actually not the definition of food because it doesn't even create energy. And that's what we eat, and that's what we serve children. You know, carbohydrates, are they all bad? No. No, it's just the modern ones are bad, right? Back in the day, like what was a carbohydrate 200 years ago? It was something that was once alive and not made in a factory. Now the carbohydrates are made in factories. You know, but if you have diabetes, you know, even the ones that aren't made in factories, you can't tolerate them because you're insulin resistant or you don't make insulin. Right? Protect the liver and feed the gut. So the liver's under siege now from all the sweet drinks. The liver is under siege. So we have to stop this so-called non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. Children are born with that now almost. It's terrifying. Feed the gut. Fiber is indigestible carbohydrate. And it feeds those 6 trillion bacteria in your gut. It's food for your gut. So fiber, you know, has a nice base. You could say I eat a plant-based diet because the base of my plate is usually plants, and then I load meat, eggs, and cheese on top of it. Because I need my 1.5 grams of protein a day because I'm an old man and I got to keep my muscle. Right? You guys all have, even the ladies, right? You got testosterone going on now. I don't. So, yeah, I got it. Unless I take some, right? So after 50, right, it's called menopause. You got to lift weights and eat more protein. All right, glycocalyx. This is another kind of emerging topic. This is this arterial lining that gets injured with diabetes and inflammation, creating cardiovascular disease, which is the #1 cause of death of men and women. So we need to stop that. You know, we need empathy, right? Because this is how the standard diet works. And they're patients, right? Like, how do you got it? No, we're going to help them. Like circadian rhythms, or crazy stuff about circadian rhythms now and metabolism. You know, I'm almost out of time. I think what I'm going to do is not do the 10. Summary, please, slides. 2 minutes on strength training and the other side of the spectrum. We don't talk about obesity, but there's another thing I think you all should read about. It's called RED-S, Relative Energy Deficiency in Sport. This is my friend from Europe. She was a world-class runner in for the UK, and she's come to my community a couple times, done a show. But yeah, she realized that she had disordered eating. You know, it was actually not. It was called relative energy deficiency in sport, meaning her needs nutritionally were mismatched by the output of her sport. I mean, she wasn't meeting that need. She wasn't able to get pregnant for years and years. You know, dialed the training back, added a little more nutrient-dense foods, a little more calorie, a little more carb, but a lot more protein and fat. She had a baby. But yeah, so the triad is actually an outdated term. You know, the triad, because that's that amenorrhea, anorexia, disordered eating, and osteoporosis, but it encompasses more than that, and men get it too. So there's this phase, you got male athletes with a bunch of stress fractures, that are on the track team or some really high energy output sport. And you want to be looking for that because there's a whole pleiotropic mechanisms, right? There's, like if you're not meeting your nutrient needs for your sport, whatever that is, it could be essential amino acids, essential fatty acids, micronutrients from like plants, calorie needs. Like there's a lot that goes into it, right? So how do you do all run 100 miles a week? You're doing all this stuff. Strength training, some basic strength training stuff. You can do a lot with body weight. So I do a lot of single leg running up hills. That's strength training. Because that's working a lot of stuff. Go try that. Go do some single leg running. That's like spring strength training, plyometric, all that plyometric stuff is really powerful. Bridges, planks. We do these for assessments. Front planks, side planks. Dynamic exercises like burpees. Right? They kick your ass, but you got to do them. Don't need to do 50 to failure. Just do some sets of this stuff. Really work on the strength. If you do kettlebell stuff, Turkish get up is like a perfect exercise if you do that one. Stress, injury, and recovery. Right? We add stress, but how do we get better? We recover. If you don't recover, you're wasting your time. If you don't recover, you're wasting your time, because that's super compensation, right? Stress the body, don't recover, stress the body, don't recover, stress the body, don't recover. You know, then I feel like getting up today, right? So that's cumulative loads, always got to recover. Deep sleep is where our recovery happens, and nutrition. Right? So you got to get the deep sleep, you got to get the deep sleep. Right? If you do nothing, you die. If you do too much, you die. So there's a sweet spot. There's a sweet spot. And everyone's going to be different there in that sweet spot. One of the things they used to do at our trainer's room at UVA is when we get an injury, they'd always give us aspirins or ibuprofen, right? Vitamin Motrin in the military. Yeah, do not do this, okay? Please, do not do this. Don't take all these, quote, anti-inflammatories for your tendinopathies and cold candies and things like that, because this inhibits the body's reparative process. So we want to recover at a stronger baseline. So if you're taking a medication that inhibits recovery and it decreases your pain, what are you going to do next time out? Hurt yourself again, right? Yeah, we don't want to be doing that. Yeah, so do some cross-training stuff. I'm going to, because we're at the end of this, just like we'd like tips, so I've kind of talked about most of this, going a little over. But let's just do 10-minute Q&A. And I'll share this slide deck with Phil, and then you guys can play with it. And I get the book if you want. Run through your life. All this stuff. So I kind of was racing there, and as I covered all this stuff. So it's 2 in the afternoon, so I have to, get you guys up and moving a little bit, right? Because this is the circadian, and I want to take a nap. Questions on anything?
What are your thoughts on the pose running technique? I know it was popular a few years ago. I didn't see.
Yeah, so I actually wrote a blog about pose. So
Yeah.
scientifically, it's hogwash. Right? You can't lift yourself off the ground. They talk about gravity moving you forward. Gravity only moves us to the ground. Right? If I drop this, I don't drop this. Gravity moves us to the ground. So we can't move forward by lifting our heels. We move forward by pushing into the ground, right? And if I want to go that way, this is just basic biomechanics, validated in the lab by people way smarter than me. Like I work like Jay DeSherry, these guys are out in the big labs who do all the science. So whoever poses Romanov doesn't do any science. He just does. But I mean, he could show how the Geber Selassie in some position. He says he's doing pose. And how the Geber Selassie, because I've seen him show videos. He was the former world record holder in the marathon, 4-time Olympic gold medalist, and I don't think Haile Geber Selassie, who ran barefoot in Ethiopia, has studied the pose method. I think he's just learned it, But yeah, so I want to move that way when I run, right? I don't want to move this way. So where do I need to apply the force? Right? I need to apply force this way. With what muscle? Glutes. I have to have hip extension, and I'm a spring. Right, so if I'm running in place, now I want to go forward. I'm just going to move my head forward a little bit. Right? And you go, right? Because that's the importance of hip extension, right? So the way you move forward is you apply a force behind you, and you spring that way. You gotta have hip extension, you gotta have a glute that works, you gotta have a springy foot. And you have to have friction on the ground, right? Like if you're just in water, right, you're pushing against, nothing, but that's why you have friction on the ground. So that's the rule. So that's kind of it, right? Like there's not, like he talks about lifting yourself up off the ground. So if you have 100 apples and you drop them, does one go up in the air or do they all go to the ground? Now if one went up in the air and 99 went to the ground, then I as a scientist would need to explain that. Okay, this gravity thing may not be true. Right, so that's how science is, right? If you have one that's like low carb, right? Like if here's a whole cohort of black swans who are not eating carbohydrates, they're losing weight, and their diabetes are going away. Well, I guess that they're just outliers. No, they're explanations. We have to scientifically explain why that worked. It's a paradox. No, a paradox is an explanation. That's why you guys do science, right? You get one black swan paradox, you figure out why that is. That's that N of 1 experiment.
And then there's always, it could take you a whole career to figure it out. Right? There's some Nobel Prizes out there for stuff that we're trying to figure out. I'm not an expert in anything. I'm just doing an experiment. And I do N-of-1 experiments every day with my patients, knowing the science of their disease. Yeah, great question. Running is just running, right? It's really doing it a long time. Yeah, so I do ultra runs. I run 100-milers and trails. Yeah, so these very cushioned shoes, yeah, you're going and running a 100-mile trail run. Oh my gosh, yeah, they're running down, 20,000 feet a game. Yeah, there's no way you could do that in like a 5-finger. I ran a 100-mile run in the Fayetteville, West Virginia last fall. I was 15,000 feet of elevation gain going in and out of World War. I wore a shoe called the Ultra Tourin, which is very cushioned but flat. So the Hokas are very flat. There's only like 4-millimeter rise. But oh my God, like I'm glad I had that pretty stacky shoe because like it's rocks and it's dark and like the proprioception is off and very protective. And everyone's a little different, so you train your body to make it work, and then on race day, if you have an event, you use a piece of equipment that's going to, and you always practice with that piece of equipment a little bit. Like what, just like carbohydrates. You talked to Zach Bitter, right? So he trains his body in this massively low carb state to be a massive butter burner, fat oxidizer. But then on race day, if he's running 7 minutes a mile for 100 miles, he'll drip in about 100 calories an hour. Now that doesn't even come close to his energy needs for that event, but it just stabilizes his blood glucose because he's burning matches a little bit more that day than when he's doing his long. He's adapting his body, and then race day he's going to do something a little different just to kind of top the tank off a little bit. That's the beauty of training low carbs. I've been in the lab with all that stuff, so my body will burn close to 2 grams a minute at max. They call it fat max. I can run 90% of my VO2 max and still be burning fat. And that's a wonderful place to be. So that means my VO2 max a couple years ago was still 65 mils per kg per minute. Yeah, so still pretty high end. But like the guy who was at a military place, he's like, I've never seen this because like people have this thing called a crossover point, right? So at a certain point, your respiratory rate goes up, right? Your RER is going up, and then you're shifting the glucose. So like, you're just chilling out almost at your max. You're still belly breathing, you're still burning fat, and then they dial it up, and then that last little bit, you get a little bit acidotic. But that's the place you want to be, because then you can go run a 100-mile race and not rely on what happens in these long runs. Like people train, but their stomach goes. Because if you're trying, and I wrote a blog after this 100-mile race, so like I had some kind of Garmin thing, and it estimates the amount of calories you're burning. I think I burned 30,000 calories, right? Something crazy, right? 100 miles. And I only took in like 1,200 calories. Most of it's electrolytes, because like you don't feel like eating. But wait, I burned 30,000, I took in 1,200. I should have been dead. Should have bombed. But no, if your body can make energy, it's pretty magical, and that's that N-of-1, but it takes time. When I did that, those guys were 2 years in Volek's lab, so when I did my last test, that's like 8 years into low carbohydrate eating. So that wasn't a 4-week trial. If you ever read something in a 4-week trial and says people can't burn fat, that's a joke. I mean, some people it's 4 years, before they fully make this shift in metabolism where they can exercise hard, using the big tank, the fat tank. We got to talk about shoes and then metabolism, but yeah, it's all about like figuring it out for yourself. Apply the science and then go experiment with some things yourself. Your shoes are nice on the trail. The wet shoes are super. I'll be hanging around after this too, so if we have other questions, throw them at me. Do our best to answer.
Pretty quickly, what would your advice be for somebody who wants to go into medicine or say nursing, PA, med school, given as you're describing, right? Most people understand the way the current medical system operates, right? It's more about sick care, not so much health care. So what would your advice be?
Go change the world, right? You have to have a thick skin.
you're going to go into this space and be disruptive. Right? No, I'm serious about this. So what I do in my own institution, you think it's highly accepted, or do you think I get bullied? I get bullied. It's called academic bullying, right? Cardiologists will say the eggs are going to kill you. The diabetologists will say, no, diabetes can't go away, right? Well, the industry, right? So if I take people off medications, who runs the medical training industry? What industry? Pharma, right? So like we're pulling people off medications, right? And it's cognitive entrenchment. LDL causes heart disease, right? So what you're breaking in any institution is cognitive entrenchment, right? So it's institutional inertia. So what's beautiful now is, it's the wisdom of the crowds, right? So 10 years ago, we got sugar out of my hospital. We got sugar drinks out of my hospital. That took 4 years. We have low carbohydrate menus. I almost lost my job to be able to teach a diabetes patient in the hospital and feed them a 10-gram carb meal. I almost lost my job. I've almost lost my job a number of times when people at ad hominem personally attacked me, saying what I was doing was dangerous. But if you know the science and you stand up and your patient results speak for themselves, it takes thick skin. But you're lucky because you got Alex Bug's lab, people like myself, staying in academic medicine. Could have left years ago and done my own thing. But we're staying in there to try to, this is a 30-year cycle of change. So Robert Lustig, who publishes in this space a lot into policies and Pete's Echo, I know Robert's work, right? So he thinks we're at year 8 of 30 years. So if you want to go to med school, do your classes, do your MCAS, so it'll be like year 15. So everyone will be teaching this. It won't be universally accepted. Robert says you basically got to wait for people to die off. And I'm sorry, I think he's right. But people will not change their minds. So you need to change your mind. I was wrong 10 years ago, 12 years ago. I would have said burn more calories than you eat. Well, of course, that's how you lose weight. I'm sure there's multiple things now I don't have right. But we have to be willing. When you look at the results of the health of this country, which is the worst on the planet, and we spent 3 times more than any other developed country, we have to reflect and say, maybe we're not doing something right. So that's kind of, don't lose hope. Yeah, go find your passion. And don't let anyone hold you back. So, you got people, you got colleagues out there now who can support you in this stuff.
Thank you.
All right, our last speaker today is Dr. Sherman, PhD. Former faculty here at Grove City, is now currently an assistant professor of health and human development at the University of Pittsburgh. Her credentials include a bachelor's and master's in teaching and a master's in exercise science and teaching exercise physiology. Dr. Sherman is a published researcher in Harvard and an article titled Energy Expenditure of Yoga versus Other Physical Activity found in the Journal of Physical Activity and Health. She's now the co-investigator of the NIH supported research concerning the effects of yoga and the health systems. As well as the last name, Dr. Sherman.
Did I turn this on correctly? Oh, I did. That's loud. Is that loud? Let me move it down. I usually don't need a microphone. Well, welcome everyone, and thank you to the first 2 speakers. It was fun to listen to their work. So yeah, I was a former faculty member here. It's really fun to come back, and this building was not here when I was teaching here, so it's really fun to come into a cool space. And Dr. Prinz and I were in our PhD program sort of at the same time. He's older than me, I think. That's not actually true. So anyway, today I'm going to be talking to you a little about my yoga research, but I want you to really look at it as a lens at which through to see other ways you can think about alternative forms of exercise. When we talk about exercise prescription, we talk about things that are easy to measure, right? Walking, running, jogging, resistance training, things that we can measure fairly easily, and we can prescribe the intensity and just the work of that very easily. But then we look at these alternative styles of movement, we go, well, what do they count as, and are they exercise? So that's really the work that I do here. So when we look at the rates of physical activity in this country, it's pretty dismal. And we actually know that the rates are less than this. This is more self-report, but more objective. Data shows closer to 30%. So we're not doing a great job in getting people to be physically active. And the new exercise guidelines were just published, a couple of years ago, and they don't really tell us anything new. I'm having like my blood sugar is dropping a little bit. I think just like sitting and maybe like a soda or something. Is that okay? It's like never happened to me while presenting, but things like driving here and my schedule's all the way off today, so thank you, Dalton. Something, I know. I'm like, I think I need to like eat another meal or something. Anyway, but these are our key guidelines for adults. And, this is what we prescribe and this is what we tell people to do. But they're not actually doing that. Less than 50% of people are doing it, somewhere closer to 30%. But this is what the guidelines are for adults. And then this is what we are telling people if they meet exercise guidelines, they will actually fund. Well, I always tell my students at Pitt, like you all are like drug dealers walking around prescribing drugs. Look at this drug results, right? Exercise is medicine, and this is the prescription you're going to be prescribing. This is the results that we can get if we can get people in motion. But we know that less than 30% of people are actually meeting those exercise guidelines. So these are some pretty good results that we're seeing from this. Now, what we also see, and more of the research that's sort of headed this direction, is we need people to move more and sit less. So this goes to the work that you were just talking about. Sitting all day is, something that is really leading to all-cause mortality, and we're seeing happen. But if we can get people to sort of move across this continuum of just getting them to move more and sit less, we know that we can really greatly impact their health. And what we're also seeing is that any activity counts. So we used to think that we needed to give people bouts of exercise of 10 minutes or more for it to count as exercise. We actually know that's not true anymore, but that was the best research that we had. So in this last formulation of the guidelines, we can see that any minute counts. Well, we talk a lot about working with athletes and things. Maybe that guideline doesn't help them in some way. But to people that are more resistant, people outside of our exercise science bubble that we live in, because you go out in the real world and you're like, oh, not everybody cares about exercise like I do. And it's a little bit harder to work with general population when they're maybe not as motivated. But these new exercise guidelines telling people any minute counts, that's good news. That does give people the purpose of parking further away in the parking garage and walking to the door, or, like walking up the stairs instead of taking that elevator. Hey, so that was your first test. He's coming to work for us I didn't really need a soda. I just wanted to see if Dalton would get me. I'm just kidding. Excuse me. Thank you. Yeah, Dalton's coming to work with us this fall. Okay, thank you. So any minute of physical activity counts, and every minute that we get people moving, and we have this acute effect of moving right away, and then we have this chronic effect of physical activity. And we also know that we need to promote physical activity, right? It's costing us a lot of money by people not being physically active. And I feel like we planned this ahead of time, of like sort of the theme of just move more, sit less, move your body in the way that it's naturally meant to move, and doing it in a way that's sustainable over time. But again, with these exercise guidelines, the key guidelines didn't really change from 10 years to 10 years, or 20 years to 20 years. But, so we're sort of seeing the same theme, and it's not really working in getting people moving. I asked my parents, do you know what the physical activity guidelines are? And they don't even know, right? Wow, look at this. I hope there's not vodka in that or anything.
No.
Okay, good, because then you'll see a different side. I don't think that would be good either. Anyway, so, but we're, not moving is costing us a lot of money. And so if we can get people in motion, then it also saves us a lot of money just from a financial. But what is the best form of physical activity to prescribe? So just like shout it out. What is it? What's the best form of physical activity? Buxton, what is it? Don't say it, Flo. What is it? What is the best form of physical activity? Tell them.
We don't know.
Well, but what's a good guess? Like,
Oh, sorry, you want me to go that route?
well, anything you're willing to do.
Oh, I'm missing the cues, yes.
I'm sorry.
The
I
best-
thought we practiced this in
I know, we
the
did.
hallway before.
Yeah, I got rattled there, so forgive me.
So the best form of physical activity to prescribe is whatever the heck the person is willing to do.
Right.
So if you tell my mom that she needs to run, she would not meet those guidelines, right? But my mom likes to go walking with her friends, so, or my mom likes water aerobics or something like that, right? So any physical activity that that person is willing to do, that's the one. But if we look at more traditional exercise guidelines, we tell people they sort of need to fit into this mold of moving this way or that way. People think like, oh, you're going to make me run, I don't want to run. Well, if running is what you want to do, great, run. But if you don't want to do that, so we want people moving in whatever form of physical activity that they're more likely to do. Now, the new exercise guidelines came out with a little bit more of a focus this way. And it's, sit less, move more, and move your way. So this was really sort of the marketing materials of the new exercise guidelines. And if you look at, this little thing right here, it shows someone biking, it shows someone swimming, it shows someone walking their dog, and someone exercising from a wheelchair, and then that last little icon is someone gardening. And we wouldn't think of gardening as being a prescriptive form of physical activity, right? But what we know is that gardening and things like that are now in more, they're now better researched, so they're included in the exercise guidelines. So we want people to move their way, because then they're more likely to do that thing, right? So I research yoga. That's one of the things that my research focuses on. And one of the reasons why I've been successful, and I'm certainly not uber brilliant or anything, or knew some sort of way to research or something. I just happened to be the one asking a question that hadn't yet been asked. And that's really something I want you to take away into your future. Find the gaps and then go out and fill them. And then your work is always novel, right? And then you're looking at just not researching the same thing, just looking, how do I look at this from a different way? And yoga is something that I turned to physically because I came from a career of professional dance. And my body was very broken from dancing. I mean, you talk about running shoes. Well, dance shoes shove your toes into it's a disaster, right? So my physical body coming out of professional dance was quite broken. And so yoga became something that I did. It was very healing. But yoga is not easy. How many of you have practiced yoga in this room? Yeah, and would you say yoga is easy? Probably not. Now, there's a lot of different styles of yoga that you can do. But yoga can be physically demanding. But what was happening is I was teaching yoga year after year after year. People were coming to me and saying, well, I can't come to yoga, I need to go do my cardio. My doctor says yoga is not exercise. And my response was, well, has your doctor done yoga? No. Okay, well, I suggest they try, but in the doctor's defense, if there's no research to back it up, how can we expect them to prescribe something that hasn't been done? So my work, I really wanted to look at that. And what we do know in yoga, in regards to what I was just talking about, is that yoga is very popular. There are millions of people doing yoga, and this number continues to go up. So between 2012 to 2014 and then into 17, we're just seeing more and more and more people do yoga. And even so, yoga used by children has really increased. And so my point here is, more and more people are doing it. We don't really want people to be doing something that we don't understand well, right? Is yoga dangerous? Is it good for them? what is it good for? So when something is very popular, it's nice to have research on it so that we can sort of validate our understanding of it and knowing what it is and then what it isn't. So 94% of Americans who practice yoga say they do it for reasons of wellness. So these are lots of, 60% say they were motivated to exercise more regularly from doing yoga. 40% were motivated to eat healthier. Over 12% cut back or stop drinking alcohol. 25%, there's a lot of work on smoking cessation and yoga. And 55% said it improved their sleep. So this is all just self-report. These are people saying, yoga had this effect on me. But this is just the effect that they felt as though it was happening. So we really need to get to, and 85% said it reduced their stress. Well, what was it about the yoga that helped them to reduce their stress? So if these are reasons why people say they're doing it, or is any of that backed up, or is it just sort of this, yoga high they walk out of and they just like feel good? But in regards to that, it's something, it's like making people feel good and they're moving and they're feeling better, and therefore they tend to weigh less, or they eat better, they take better care of their body. We really can't argue with prescribing it too much. But, from years of being a yoga teacher, because after doing it and really feeling the effects in my body, I went on to learn to teach yoga, which was a very easy transition coming from dance. But these were the questions I would get all the time. You would teach like a great yoga class and everybody would be happy, and then you'd hear everybody go, how many calories did I burn doing that? I'm like, wow, that's your concern. But they want to know, like, how hard was my body working when I was doing that? Do I still need to go do my cardio, or did I get a cardio effect from that? Is yoga bad for me? Is it dangerous? What is yoga good for? Does it count as recovery? Does it count as cardio? All of these questions. How many days a week should I do yoga? Is yoga good for, and then fill in the blank? Is yoga good for my running? Is yoga good for cancer? Is yoga good for, and the yoga research is becoming very plentiful, which is very nice to kind of sit back and see all of the yoga research change. But definitely when I started researching yoga, there was very, very little work on yoga. So this is what, there's a lot of research on yoga, but this is really some of the work that we've had repeated studies. These are the health benefits that NIH is sort of putting their seal of approval on, saying we've had this many things. Well, look at this. We know that yoga improves sleep, balance, it's the work you're talking about, mental health, emotional health, neck pain, back pain, PTSD, smoking cessation, weight loss, chronic disease, depression, menopausal symptoms, stress. So, these are some pretty good benefits of the practice. Now, I have to bring up that there isn't just one way to do yoga. So I presented at an American Diabetic Association conference, and I put up this slide and just to show, like, there is no official style of yoga called flower yoga, but that's what I like to call the, like, lying on your back with lavender and eye pillows, and like, that's what I like to call flower yoga. Personally, my favorite style, in my 40s. And then on the other end of the spectrum, we have power yoga, which is where we see vinyasa. And then you see more hot yoga kind of down in that side. And hot yoga just means the room that the temperature is warm. That's really all that means, and I'll show you a little bit of data on that later. But there's this spectrum of style of yoga. So you can do it in this really flowery way, and that is really restorative, and then you can do it in this really powerful way. And I just want to note that students self-select their style, students of yoga. So are the people that go to power yoga different from the people that go to flower yoga? Probably, right? So we just need to consider that when we're looking at these other styles. So, of course, these are important considerations in all research, but these are additional considerations in sort of alternative exercise, which is what I would call yoga and something like animal flow. So Buxton and I talk about this stuff all the time. But these are really important. So bias. Do you think Jeff Buxton is biased towards animal flow?
Yes.
Yes.
Do you think I'm probably biased towards yoga? Yes. Right? Because I feel like it has had a good effect on my body, right? So we all have some bias, right, that we bring to the table. But that's why it's really important to have a committee and to have some skeptics on our work, right? You know, other people that are on my research are people that maybe don't even practice yoga, but look at it from sort of a different critical eye. So that's really important. It's having a lot of people within your scope of what you're doing that are sort of making sure that keeping your bias in check, right? So, but protocol matters. So let's say I studied a more restorative style of yoga and it found it was good for sleep. Well, and so so then the headline says, yoga good for sleep. But then, well, what was the protocol in the research? So you go into the research and you go, oh, they laid on pillows and someone sprayed lavender on them. Nobody really does that to yoga, by the way, I'm just making a point. They do, let me know, that sounds fun. But we have to think about the protocol of these alternatives. Because again, when we look at running research, they ran at this speed, at this elevation, for this period of time, right? But these more alternative styles of movement aren't as easy to prescribe and sort of like validate, right? So we have to think about the protocol. What style did they do? What poses did they do? How long did they hold that pose, right? And also convenience samples. This is what it looks like when we do research in universities, right? It's like, who's the, who do we have access to right here on our campus? We have less of a problem of this at Pitt because we just have a more diverse and just sort of live in a more populated area. But when you do research here, who do you ask? Well, you. Oh, hey, I'm doing a study. Can you all just come in and be part of the study, right? So that's a convenience sample, so we need to think about that as well. A lot of yoga research is done on people who are already going to yoga. Okay, but people who already go to yoga are probably different from the people who don't already go to yoga, right? So we have to really consider that with these alternative exercise research. And then the confounding factors. There are principles in yoga that teach you to live without harming things. So a lot of principles in yoga teach you things like eating a more plant-based diet. And so are there other factors that is happening when that person does that alternative style of exercise that is actually affecting the research and not the thing we're researching itself? Okay? So things just we need to keep in mind. So my work really looks at yoga as a pathway to health. Now, because if you're looking like yoga and weight loss, well, there really isn't much there. But I started to try to tell like my fellow researchers and in grant writing going, well, but yoga, it's not that it's this magic pill and then just like hand it out, you take it, you get these effects. It's really looking at it as a pathway to other things. And so I want you to think about that in research is like, okay, well, what else is happening? Well, what we do know in the research is that yoga improves sleep. We do have that research. Okay, so we also know that if we improve someone's sleep, we can improve their health. And then we also do have the research that says that yoga decreases stress and anxiety. Well, we know if we can get people's stress levels down and their anxiety levels down, we can improve their health. So it's not to say that, if we say, and put anything in that improved health, you can put weight loss or, sports performance of any kind, or whatever it is. Think about the pathway through which that alternative exercise form is actually reaching that thing, okay? So we know that people that do yoga, they sleep better. We know that yoga, now we know in the research that yoga is a form of physical activity. And, within the last 10 years, you could not have argued using data that yoga was physical activity, but we now know better. And yoga decreases stress and anxiety. It decreases depression. Well, depressed people are not healthy people, right? So if we can get someone's depression levels down, we can improve their health. We also know that yoga usually comes along with like a community going to yoga, and group exercise works in this way. People go to group exercise and they're like their friends are there. Like my mom, she goes to water aerobics. She knows all the ladies who do it, right? And so they talk, and it's this community inclusion. And years ago I was teaching a class here at Grove City that we would go over and participate in the Silver Sneakers program at the YMCA. Do you still do that here at all? So, but what would happen, Silver Sneakers is the aging individuals, right? Their class would start at like 10 a.m. Those people would show up at 8 in the morning. And they'd sit in the lobby. And there was a guy who was in his 90s. But they would sit in the lobby and I'm like, are we late? Class starts in 2 hours. But they were a community. And that's what we find with yoga as well. They get to know each other. We see this in group exercise. Well, how is that actually acting as a pathway to improving health? So does this form of physical activity actually come along with these other benefits that could be one of the things impacting health? And then other positive behaviors. You know, you start working out, you start eating a little bit better, you start feeling a little bit better, you start drinking a little less alcohol, or, you know, people stop smoking cigarettes or whatever. So it wasn't that the yoga made them do that, but the effect that it had for these other factors. So yoga is a pathway. So my research validated Vinyasa yoga, which is one style of yoga. It's in the power category. However, I'll show you my protocol, and we didn't do it hot and fast, and it wasn't like that. But Vinyasa yoga, the word Vinyasa just means to flow with breath. So that means you're arriving in one pose on an inhale, and you're going to another pose on an exhale, and you're kind of flowing through postures, not the whole time, but there is a movement called the Vinyasa that sort of, you know, links a couple poses together to move. So my research looked specifically at Vinyasa yoga and validated it as moderate physical activity. And then what we know is that with moderate physical activity, we can actually see all these health benefits. So it's not that, you know, it was yoga, but it could be one way of getting people to achieve these benefits. Now, if someone hates doing yoga, we do not want to prescribe yoga, right? Because again, what's the best form of physical activity? Whichever one someone's willing to do, right? And then stick to that one. But what we were seeing is a lot, those millions of people doing yoga and then being told, but yoga's hokey, yoga's not good for, you know, yoga's not exercise or whatever. So we want to allow people to meet those exercise guidelines however it is they want to meet them. So this is a slide from my study, that was my dissertation study that then later on became an NIH grant. So, and I was looking at yoga and reduced body weight. And we do a lot of obesity research at the University of Pittsburgh, and I do my research within the Physical Activity and Weight Management Research Center. So we work with overweight and obese individuals. But these are not obese individuals like you would necessarily see on like a reality television show. These are normal human beings just struggling with their weight. And so I was told, well, yoga doesn't lead to weight loss. We don't have the data to back that up, so we can't make that claim. But what we do have in the data very early on was that yoga participation, what we now know, increases energy expenditure to the level of moderate to vigorous physical activity. And yoga participation enhances stress management, improves mood, reduces pain, improves sleep, and leads to a heightened mindfulness. Now, mindfulness I'll talk about later, but just being aware of our behaviors as we're doing them, right? And then what we do know in the research is that these things actually can lead to reductions in body weight. And again, this is where we can look at yoga as a pathway to reduce body weight. So my original study, I had 40 yoga practitioners, and we actually needed 28 to have enough power to make the determination, but we had 40 practitioners, and I had 20 males and 20 females, and I also had normal weight and overweight individuals in my study, so it's a pretty ideal sample. And then their yoga practice, another thing, is that we're telling people when they're physically active, well, we want you to do a warm-up that's proper. I don't know if any of you do that. I don't even do that. We're like, oh, that's not, yeah. So we're supposed to be warming up, and then we're supposed to be doing like mostly aerobic. We need to do a proper cool down. We all skip that, right? And then we also need like some sort of mobility, flexibility, and then we need to be doing like, some resistance training as well. And so what I was seeing in yoga, just in my own practice, was that yoga really does allow us to get all of those things in one. And an authentic, traditional yoga practice starts with a really nice, easy warm-up, and then there's the more vigorous part, which is where a lot of the movement is. And then towards the end, there's a lot of stretching involved, a cool down, and then there's shavasana, which is where you like lay on your back and sleep at the end. So everyone's yoga pose is at the end, right? So I was going, well, it's really this kind of this perfect prescription. And again, that's the way yoga is the authentic style of yoga. Those things are just naturally included. So in my protocol, it was very slow, very deliberate. 5 breaths per pose. 5 breaths is 20 seconds. That's a long time to be in a yoga pose. But my point in that is I could have easily done the yoga quickly and then gone, look at this, look how vigorous yoga is. Look at my great study, right? But needed to make sure that it was slow so that it was, sure, if you speed it up, you're going to see more of these results. Also, the room was 68 to 72 degrees. If we would have heated up the room, well, maybe the heat would have been to blame for some of the results, but we did lab temperature 68 to 72 degrees, which people who practice yoga often found the room to be very cold. But again, we didn't want to have this outsized factor, okay? So this is the original study from this. So I'll show you kind of what it looks like to study yoga. So the person on your left is Seth Creasy. He's now a faculty member at University of Colorado. And this is Dr. Ryan Minster on the right. He was on my committee, but he was on the original concussion research at Pitt. So this is what it looks like, Oxycontin Mobile. They're wearing a polar heart rate monitor. They just have the yoga mat. They had a television that had a person demonstrating, but then it was my voice just giving the cues. So there were no other cues. There were no other take a deep breath and relax as you exhale. None of that. It was just name of the pose, 20 seconds later. Name of the pose, 20 seconds later. And it was all timed so that every pose was 20 seconds. So I was in the room when we did one person at a time. And they kind of watched the practice in case they needed to look up. But these were regular yoga practitioners. These were people who knew how to do yoga. Because think about it, if we would have just said, hey, random person off the street, come do yoga, and then we slapped this energy expenditure equipment on them, and then I don't know about you, but the first time I did yoga, I thought I might die. Any of you? Maybe you feel like that? Yeah. So it's like there was a lot of energy expenditure kind of used up in falling over, or it was kind of sloppy, right? But people that practice yoga often, because it would have been unfair to just take people that never have done it before and just kind of put them in this. So these were regular yoga practitioners that were doing this. This is our energy expenditure data. So we did a self-selected walking protocol, and then we did our heart rate match walking protocol. So this is just the self-selected speed walking. We told them to walk briskly like they would for exercise, and then we blinded the treadmill for them. So this solid line is the yoga. This is their energy expenditure. And then this dotted line is the walking. So this makes sense, right? In yoga, we see the beginning. This is child's pose. These are our sun salutations. This is balancing. This is back bending. And then all this stuff that happens at the end, the last 15 minutes of a 60-minute practice, is like the stretches. Half pigeon and, lying on your back, sleeping in Shavasana. So no one ever was saying, lying in Shavasana is more energy expenditure than walking. No one was ever saying that. So we didn't actually think that. But in a 60-minute walking session, this is the energy expenditure versus 60 minutes of yoga. And so what we see is the first 45 minutes of the practice, there was actually no difference in the energy expenditure. But then these last 15 minutes, where you're lying on the ground, stretching, doing all this stuff that we know we need to take time to do, but not often take time to do it. And then lying on your back, which is a more meditative posture. During those first 45 minutes, we didn't actually see a difference in the energy expenditure. This is the heart rate across 2 sessions. So, steady heart rate during walking. Look at those heart rates for the yoga. That's pretty wild, right? And remember, they weren't jumping up and down or doing burpees or doing fast yoga. Like these heart rates right here are like standing in one spot doing a yoga pose, and the heart rate is that high, and it's doing that. So I found that to be really interesting. So what we found was the METs were approximately 4 METs across a session of vinyasa yoga, which meets our moderate intensity activity guidelines, which tell us 3 to 6 METs. And then I was very happy to see in our new exercise guidelines, unlike in the other ones, we now see active forms of yoga, for example, vinyasa yoga or power yoga, to be included in the exercise guidelines. So, we also see things like ballroom or line dancing. Ballroom dancing was one of the classes I used to teach here. General yard work and home repair work. Exercise classes like water aerobics, and again, we're getting to the what do people like to do, and then helping them to go, well, is this validated as a form of physical activity? So what other forms of movement might see similar results? So when we look at yoga research, we can think, okay, what else could we look at that might give us some of these results? So I pulled this off your web page. Right? Are any of you in this photo? No? Oh, Dalton's in this photo? Oh my gosh, that is Dalton. I'm going to send that to my colleagues. This is who we're getting. This is one of our new faculty members in our department right here, doing animal flow.
Oh yeah, that's when I was 20 years old.
Yeah. So, but that's why, now what happened? There's a population of people who like to do this as a form of movement. So we need to do the research that shows, is it, isn't it, what is it, what isn't it? So think of other things like Pilates or Tai Chi or what, can you think of any that I'm missing? What else might be like an alternative exercise form that might be a little underutilized or maybe seen as like weird or just sort of, can you think of any?
Animal flow.
What is it?
Animal flow.
What? Say that loud.
Animal flow.
Animal flow, yeah, of course. But that's why he's doing the research here. So you just wait. You just wait. Data collection ended yesterday, right? Is that what you said? Yep. So, but there is a whole population of weirdos like Buxton, right? I love it. But my point is, if the people doing this style of movement enjoy it, and then we say to them, but we need you to run to meet exercise guidelines. That's disappointing information, right? Because we need to let people move in whatever way they are most likely to move. And we need to be careful not just looking at the research and saying, well, we don't have the research to back this up, so that's a hard pass. We need you to do this other thing. And I had students that weren't coming to yoga because their physicians were telling them, well, I need you to do brisk walking. And again, the research wasn't there to back that up, but we need to ask the question, well, what's it like when you're doing X, Y, Z, whether it's yoga or whatever it is? Or do you feel like you're a little bit out of breath or that your heart's pumping? Do you feel like you'd be able to sing a show tune full out while you're doing it? Oh, no? Okay. So we need to kind of look at these alternative forms of, and animal flow just happens to be a good excuse of, something to look at like that, like yoga. So, but there's something else at play in things like yoga that goes beyond just energy expenditure. And what is that? How do we study that? I don't really know. I ask myself that every day, and I'm trying to get to it in some of the other studies. So this was a study that actually happened at Pitt before I got there. And the yoga group was the control group, which didn't really work out because they did a lot better than the intervention group, which is really interesting. But in a traditional lifestyle study, so that would be traditional diet and exercise. So they were prescribed, these are overweight, obese individuals, they were prescribed a certain caloric diet, and they were prescribed exercise, which is most often prescribed brisk walking for that population. We can usually get about a 60-ish% of retention across the whole intervention. Now, an obesity intervention could be a long time. It could be like 18 months. So we lose people, right? It's hard to keep people really excited about that. But one group was given the lifestyle, which was the diet and exercise, but they were also given yoga. So the yoga group, and I looked at the protocol. I wasn't, like I said, I wasn't there, but I went back and I watched all the yoga videos. it was what we would call flower yoga. So they were not doing power. They were not doing vinyasa. They were lying on their backs, doing supine twists. That's the style of yoga they were doing. So when we go, well, they were working harder, they were burning more calories, it was actually a style of yoga that we wouldn't have seen that. So this is their retention number. We had like a 90-some% retention for the group that was doing yoga. So wait a minute, they were doing more and we kept them longer? That was wild. I mean, this is like an unheard of retention number in obesity intervention. So, and again, this is the group that was doing everything this first group was doing, but they were adding this yoga piece. And so they actually stayed around longer. And then they ended up losing more weight. It was like 2 kgs more weight. And again, we would look at this and go, well, they were doing more. They were prescribed more exercise. But in looking at the style of yoga that they were doing, it was absolutely not exercise. It was delicious. It looked amazing, but it was definitely not exercise. They were barely standing for any of it. So we actually saw them more successful in weight loss. And then the more days of yoga that they did, the better they did. So the more yoga they did, the better they did in terms of their weight loss. And, you know, I get comments, I think it was you that commented, Alex, it was like a reviewer too. Always a, you know, so I was getting like a review comment like, well, overweight people can't do yoga. Teach overweight people yoga all the time. And then the comment was, well, overweight people have to modify the yoga so much that they then don't use as much energy expenditure. And again, we have to run the data. So it was really nice that I had a sample of 40 people and I had almost a halfway split between people that were, just according to BMI, by the way, overweight versus normal weight. And we actually saw that this is total energy expenditure up here. And of course, we would expect the overweight population to use more energy expenditure. But this, this right here is, this is energy expenditure. This is the number of distance. So here's their energy expenditure. But then this is the number of yoga poses modified. So there was really no difference in the number of modifications taken between groups. So we know that we can get, you know, sort of like yoga is for everybody if the person wants to do yoga. You know, we don't want to put everybody into yoga who doesn't want to be doing it, but we can actually put lots of bodies into yoga. And although I have to say, the majority of people teaching yoga are white, women, thin, college educated. So in order to get more diverse people into yoga, they need to be represented in the people teaching it. So that's something that I really focus on doing is finding people who are not those things and helping them to become yoga certified and teach yoga, and as a way to bring more people into the practice. So my dissertation became a pretty big study that we did that looked at 2 styles of yoga. So we did, okay, in obesity intervention do we need to be doing vinyasa, or could we actually do what we call hatha, a more restorative style of yoga? So we took overweight population in obesity intervention, gave half of them vinyasa yoga, half of them a very restorative form of yoga, and we really didn't see a difference in the weight loss. What we did see was that after the yoga intervention was 45 minutes or up, they didn't want to do it. So, 45-minute class seemed to be that sweet spot of like, if it's a 60-minute class, then it's less likely to do it. And then this is actually in press right now. This is a research team that I'm on out of Brown University. And this is looking at trying to get at some of the other things, like what does it play? And this uses a style of yoga called Iyengar yoga, which is a very old, authentic style of yoga, but not vinyasa. So there's no flow between the poses. So much more static poses. And we looked at things like distress tolerance and just kind of trying to get at more of the self-compassion measures and some of the other things beyond just energy expenditure. And I didn't really care passionately about doing, what's the energy, how many calories do we burn doing yoga? But sometimes we have to do the study that we don't want to do first in order to do the studies that we want to do. You know, it's not like, I had like some yoga teachers mad at me after I did my study. They're like, well, of course yoga is exercise. Well, yeah, but tell NIH that, and then they won't give me any research money to, you know, use it as an intervention in an overweight population, or constantly being told, okay, they can do yoga, but then you also have to prescribe exercise. Well, what if yoga is the exercise? So, you know, that wasn't like my dream study to do as my first study, but sometimes you have to do the study you don't want to do in order to go, okay, now that we know that, now that that's cleared up, let's go do the studies that, you know, we want to do. So, in terms of hot yoga, how many of you have heard of hot yoga? Yeah, how many of you have wanted to participate in that before? Maybe some of you. I personally love doing yoga in the heat, but it's usually just sort of mimicking the internal body temperature, so 98.6 degrees. Of course, there are certain styles of yoga that have pushed that to like 120 or whatever, but you know, people going, well, yoga practitioners I've heard say over the years, and also yoga students say, well, I burn more calories when I do it in the heat, so I get a better workout, or it increases my range of motion, or whatever. So I like to do yoga in a warm room because it feels better, particularly as I get older. You know, I think there's just things that you can kind of get away with when you're younger, like stretching in colder temperatures or whatever. But I show you this research. I didn't do this study, but because we need to look at, well, what do we think about that thing though? Is it true? And so there's been, this is just one of the studies done on comparing the energy expenditure of a yoga practice in a heated space versus, you know, a room temperature space. And there really is nothing to back up that by doing hot yoga, you're burning more calories. So I bring this up as a way of going, well, but people like to do it in the heat, but what about the whole group of people that don't go to yoga because it's warm in that room? So particularly people, perimenopausal, menopausal women, postmenopausal women, don't really love going into a room that's 100 degrees, right? They're like, I'll have my hot flash out here in the cold temperature. But anyway, so we also need to get at these alternative forms of physical activity to look at what do we believe about it, or what do the people that do it believe is true that might actually not be true. No result is a result, so we need to do that work as well. So meditation is something else that I wanted to bring up to you, although it's not a, you know, an exercise form necessarily, but we have a lot of good data on it and its effect on things like sports performance. And ACSM has had me give a lot of presentations lately on meditation and its effect on sports performance. So, and how to use it with athletes. So I wanted to bring it up just because it is an alternative something that I do study a lot. So I just want to talk quickly about like, what is meditation, what isn't it, and then why should we use it for athletes, and then how is that? So meditation, we use the word meditation, sometimes people are like, oh, here we go. Like this sort of abstract, weird thing, right? But meditation is just focusing on one thing, right? So you're just choosing what your mind is focusing on and giving your attention to one thing. It's something like 23 times that it's actually brought up in the Bible, right? So just taking your focus away from everywhere where it goes and then putting it really on one thing. I love this graph. You can just get this by Googling it. It's, you know, just an image on the internet, but I love it because it does a really good job of helping us understand, like, what is mindfulness? And so with a person, you know, is thinking like, oh, my car and my spouse and my job, and they're, you know, we call it monkey mind in yoga, like the little chatter that's in your head all the time. And then how many of you have dogs at home? Yeah, you go see you're all like, yeah, that's my dog. Your dog is seeing the sun and the trees and is just thinking sun and trees, right? So children and pets like are naturally very mindful that as we get older, we become like more like the monkey mind. So this is what it means to actually be mindful versus just having a mind that's full. And then this also shows us like in the present moment, like here we are in the present moment. We're in whatever room number this in this building, on this campus. But then when your mind is thinking about like tomorrow, or oh, what are you gonna have for dinner? Or what am I gonna be when I grow up? Like, you know, those versus like, oh, I can't believe that person hurt me. I'm so mad at my mom right now. Or, you know, whatever, like past, and then we think about the future. Well, when we just put our mind in the present moment, we're practicing meditation. So just like right now, however you're sitting, but perfect as it is, Notice your feet. Like with your mind, think about your feet. You just practiced meditation. You did. Because you thought about something that was going on in the present moment, your feet. You probably didn't, actually, you've already been asked to think about your feet today, so, you know, you've been thinking about your feet a lot, right? But that's practicing mindfulness meditation. So some myths about meditation is like, oh, I'm bad at it. Well, yeah, you're bad at it. The human condition is for us to be like, you know, sort of like thinking about a million things at once, or that I have to clear my mind to meditate. Well, good luck doing that, because that's really impossible. In order for meditation to be worth it, I have to do it for an hour. I have to move to some monastery and meditate for 6 days. No, you don't. Just in the same regards as like any minute counts of physical activity, same thing with meditation. Or I'm too busy to do it. That's a common myth, and then it's wasted time, that it's not actually valuable. So some roadblocks to athletic performance and success, and I put these 3 logos in here because we've been really hearing a lot in the news lately of things happening that is negative effect of athletes on their mental health, right? I mean, gosh, the Olympics, it was just one athlete after another after another. The suicide rates in the NFL, of course, concussion being an effect of that, but just the pressure on NCAA athletes and, you know, anxiety, depression, perfectionism, burnout, fear, stress, overtraining, injury. These are all things that we see being roadblocks to athletic success. You know, there's a lot of athletes in this room, and these are things that can be negatively affecting their performance. So what does the science say about meditation specifically? And these are, and again, there are others, but these are the things that are just well researched over and over and over again that we can really kind of stand firm on. Studies in anxiety, depression, digestion, addiction, decreased pain sensitivity, fatigue, improved cognitive function, decreased inflammatory conditions. Like, think about these things on this slide and how that could actually benefit you. And again, think about meditation as a pathway. If all of a sudden you have reduced fatigue, well then that could result in you working out harder, or your sports performance in your specific sport going up. I mean, how much time you spend in recovery, if we could actually speed up recovery, right? And so that's where really meditation can come in and have a positive effect on sports performance. These are emerging and more preliminary evidence that we're seeing. Use of it in binge eating disorder. REDS is something very important that we're now hearing more and more about. You know, we used to call it the female triathlete, the female athlete triad, right? And it was like we only talked about it in terms of females, but now we're going, wait a minute, we've been sort of excluding men in this work. So lots of other effects on meditation, sort of benefits from meditation. But also this quicker recovery from illness, you know, that's huge. Children, just some extra things that youth can get from meditation. And children are actually really good at meditation. Of course, we can't just say, lie there quietly and do nothing and think nothing and say nothing. Well, not really. You know, you can teach children to meditate in sort of more fun ways. One way, do you want me to teach your way? Like, pretend, oh yeah, you do. Okay. Do you remember those little bubbles? You know what I mean? Well, okay, good. So everyone take out your imaginary bubbles. Take the lid off, put the lid on. And you know how you have to like stick your finger in there and find the wand? Do that. Find the wand. Okay, take it out. All right? And we're gonna blow bubbles together. 1, 2, 3. All right, and then go ahead and put it back in, and then take a big breath in and breath out. That's a way to get kids to practice meditation. Why? Because they had to focus on their breath. Yeah, and then they, right? But kids do that. They see the bubbles, and they work really hard to get all those bubbles across the room, right? So they're in some ways a lot better at this than we are. But if we can get them to practice and focus on their breath in that moment, we actually see some of these positive effects on them. Like they report being better liked. For kids, that's really big. Fewer ADHD symptoms, increased focus, more self-control, less aggression. I mean, we can all benefit by having children experience more of these benefits. Plus, I love that picture. That kid is so cute, right? Okay, so this is just thinking about then as meditation as a pathway. Like we get athletes then to meditate, knowing in the research that these are things that we can get through meditation. Think about how you could actually benefit, and your sport could benefit from those things, like you being happier. Whoa, you'd be better liked, wouldn't you? Your roommate would like you better if you were just happier. So things like that. So what is the best form of meditation? Come on, we've been practicing. What is it?
Anything they want.
Anything they're willing to do, right? Anything they're willing to do. So there's not just one way to do it. I just taught you a way. So, if you like the bubbles, go buy some. So moving meditation. You can absolutely go on a meditative walk. Let me tell you what that doesn't look like. Earbuds, podcast, doesn't count. But you walking, maybe noticing the sounds of the leaves crunching under your feet as you go, noticing the clouds, the people walking by, the sound that the trees make when the wind blows. Meditation. And you were moving the whole time. Tai Chi, this picture right here, Tai Chi, yoga, those can be, I say can be, because again, if I'm doing yoga, but I'm worrying about my, I don't know, my daughter the whole time I'm doing yoga, I would say that I probably miss the mindful aspects of it, but I'm thinking about my hands on the yoga mat and my breath, and oh, my quad is a little bit tight, and those are all things happening in the present moment. That's how these things can be mindful forms of movement. And then there's apps. Headspace, this is the app for Headspace. Calm is a good one. So there are lots of apps. There's a free one called Insight Timer that you can do, and you can just sort of set a timer and it plays the sound of the rain or something, and you just sit there and listen, and when the thought comes, you just try to let it pass, and sometimes it'll go really well and sometimes it won't, but an app can also really help you to get in a daily. Headspace is nice because it says like sign up for a course, so you just go like, okay, I'm going to do this course, and it gives you just a little one every day. It sort of gives you little badges and stars and thumbs up for doing it every single day. So apps can really help. Here's one. It's just a box breathing practice that is a good one. I'll teach you. So we'll take an inhale, and then at the top of the inhale we'll hold it, and then we'll take an exhale, and at the bottom of the exhale we'll hold it. So let's do it together. So take a big breath in. Hold the inhale at the top. Hold your breath. Now breathe out. Hold your out breath at the bottom. Take an inhale. Hold the inhale at the top. And exhale. Hold your breath at the bottom. So that's a form of meditation called box breathing. So we can use our breath, or focusing on your breath, as a way to get present in our bodies. That is a form of meditation. So very simple, right? Box breathing. You can take that with you. I highly recommend do that before an exam. Do that before an exam, before you take your GRE, whatever it is that you're taking. Do that before an exam. Just take like 10 breaths in that way, and it will really help. Gratitude is actually a practice in meditation. So whether that's making a list. If I told you all to make a list right now of everything that you're grateful for, you would have to be really present in order to make that list. And then what we see is you thinking of those things and writing them down, your brain just lights up. It just gets really excited, and there's this happy effect on doing the practice of gratitude. So again, it's one form, it's one style, it's one way. And then a mantra. A mantra is just like a word or a phrase that you focus on. So maybe it's as I inhale, I'm going to think let. And as I exhale, I'm going to think go. Try that. Breathe in, think let. Breathe out, think go. So that's just the use of a phrase. So many of you have phrases or verses that mean something to you. Meditating on that, thinking about that thing, connecting it to just the rhythm of your breath, that could be using a mantra in order to meditate. Okay? Prayer. is a very meditative, mindful practice. So, in teaching this to athletes, they think, oh, good, so I can just like, dear God, please let me hit a home run. No, not like that. Right? Not like that. But prayer can be a very mindful practice. And so asking if you're working with an athlete or a client, giving them these options. And another one is like maybe maybe music is something that, and I would say this is different from like your pump up music playlist, you know what I'm talking about? You're like, I gotta get psyched to go work out playlist, that one, not that. But maybe like the sound of a rain or soft music or something, that could be something that can help you focus, right? And then one more is, counseling and talking about something and just bringing your awareness to that thing can really help. And this is something that a lot of athletes could really benefit from, talking it out. What is it that you're stressed about? What is it that you're worried about? What is it that makes you anxious? When you feel like that, what's happening? And so having someone to actually talk it out with can be very mindful and can have some of these effects. So same thing in choosing a form of physical activity, asking your athlete, well, if these are some options and what would count as meditation, which one of these do you think you're more likely to do? And I feel like that's been a theme today. Like, well, you said if they're not willing to do it, like, or if they feel restricted by it, like, it's not going to work. Same thing with this, same thing with alternative practices and movement. So asking them, is making a gratitude list sound like something you could do? So that could be a list that could be different every single day if you do it. Is prayer something you align with? Or if you're out there and you're like, no, okay, then that's not the one I'm going to prescribe you. What about box breathing? What about some of these breathing styles? Having them really utilize the one that is the most meaningful to them. And then that is the one that has the most chance in impacting their health. Thank you very much. Thank you. If there are any questions? They're tired. You're all like, I've been sitting here for hours. We get it. We get it.
Sally,
Yes.
what direction is your lab going in, like future research? And
Yeah.
What's next for you guys?
Well, this is actually also something that Alex brought up today, is weight maintenance. We can get people to lose it, can't quite get them to maintain it. So some of the studies that I'm working on right now out of all-female research team out of Brown University is looking at weight maintenance. And can we utilize yoga to help people maintain weight loss? So that's sort of the next initial direction I'm going in. But in the future, you know how it is. It's like, we'll see. We'll see what we learn from that and then go, let's kind of go this direction. So we'll see. But that's sort of what I'm working on most directly in the future.